Your life changed when you began to feed information up the food chain. Tell us what happened.
So January 6, 2021
Okay.
is when the Capitol riot occurred. Anytime these events go on, there's going to be some kind of FBI assets there. So for Big Bureau, in the press to say initially, they don't know how many, sources were there, or they're not sure if there were any there, on its face is not true. There was video camera footage of the Capitol grounds, but they were being very restrictive, even internally, with what camera footage we were even allowed to get.
Really?
The official suspension letter I get says I'm being suspended for conspiratorial views in regards to the events of January 6, 2021, and they questioned my allegiance to the United States of America.
Is the FBI reformable?
My opinion on the FBI is I don't think it's actually salvageable. And I would just say, from what I've observed of the culture, I don't think it needs to exist. Even if they try to do a salvage job, which is what they're attempting right now,
Right.
I think it's a fool's errand, and I think it's fool's gold for the American people. I think my story is a story of warning. You need to get your act together. You need to pay attention to what your government's doing, but you also need to get your spiritual act together. Don't be shaken. Don't be discouraged. Even if everything's falling apart, your hope is in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He conquered sin and death. You just put your faith and hope in Him and do the best you can.
Let's begin with a little prayer. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now at the hour of our death. Amen. And I pray for the Pope Francis' the rest of his soul. Amen.
Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Mr. Marcus Allen, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm going to read a short introductory statement of who you are and your incredible credentials and why I'm so honored to be sitting here so that my audience knows why you're here and what we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to dive in and go through all kinds of fascinating subjects, okay?
Good to go.
All right. Mr. Marcus Allen served our country as a United States Marine, completing multiple overseas deployments and earning commendations for his service. Following his military career, he joined the FBI as a staff operations specialist, where his analytical precision and commitment to justice earned him recognition as the Charlotte Field Office Employee of the Year in 2019. In that role, he supported complex investigations, processed intelligence, and contributed to counterterrorism efforts. But Marcus Allen made national headlines not for his accolades, but for his courage. Courage to question the official narrative surrounding January 6th, and to do so from within the very agency tasked with investigating it. The act of conscience came at a great personal cost. His security clearance was suspended, his pay was halted, and his name publicly maligned, all for sharing open source information that raised inconvenient questions. He has since testified before Congress twice, exposing internal pressures and political bias within the Bureau. But what truly shocked the Catholic world was not just what he said, it was how he said it. Before a national audience, he invoked the name of Jesus Christ and urged his fellow Americans to prepare, to store food, to pray the Rosary daily, to keep the first Saturday devotion. It was a moment of striking clarity, a federal whistleblower sounding not just a political alarm, but a spiritual one. And I'm very happy to welcome you to this table.
Well, thank you for having me on the show today.
Yeah. So I can only give a little snapshot of your bio and your service record and all that kind of stuff. So there's much more to say.
Right.
So I thought we would begin kind of the first part of this episode here talking about your biography and your formation as a human, as a man, as a Marine, an FBI husband and father. So why don't you start talking about once upon a time you were born and where'd you grow up, and just let's just start talking about your life.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I was born in central Louisiana, in the heart of Cajun country in Evangeline Parish, a little country town called Mamou, Louisiana. So hey to the folks in Mamou. Got family still out there. Baptized at St. Anne's Parish, which St. Anne's has been a great help to me and my wife personally over time. Spent my early years there as a toddler, and then my father worked for Pennzoil. He got a transfer to Houston because he got a promotion to be an inspector for Pennzoil and their platforms. Unfortunately, in the transition, he died in a car accident, and I was in the vehicle with him, and my mom and my sister were trailing behind because we were in the middle of moving from Louisiana to Texas for the job. My mom realized that she was pretty hysterical. She saw the entire accident. It was a Mack truck. My dad drove a Chevy Nova, and the windshield was shattered. So she thought I'd flown out the front end of the vehicle. So she's hysterical, and then she just remembers that there was a big, large man in overalls who showed up, and he reached down into the footwell of the Chevy Nova and grabbed me and gave me to her after the accident. And she says she turned to thank him, and he was gone. She asked, witnesses, bystanders, hey, did you see the large man, in the overalls? Where'd he go? And no one could explain to her where he went. So we kind of look at that as a, providential, occurrence. Yeah. My mom, she was kind of tired of Louisiana at that point. She had wanted a change. So even though my dad had died, continued to move to Houston. And that's where I grew up with my mom, and my sister was in Houston, Texas.
How old were you at the wreck?
I was about 2.5. It was before my 3rd birthday, so I have no recollection of my dad or anything like that. My mom said I was pretty, black and blue from the accident and that sort of thing, but otherwise intact. So grew up in Houston. I'd say nominally Catholic. My mom said that faith was a big part of her growing up. She remembers being a child and when they took prayer out of schools, and she was really sad about that. She said, even at the public school in Elton, Louisiana, which is where she is from, the kids would break off at a certain part of the day and they'd have their catechesis with whatever their faith tradition was. And prayer was just a regular part of school. So she can firmly remember when prayer was taken out of school when she was a kid. So for her kids being able to pray at school was a big deal for her, which is part of the reason she sent us to Catholic school. And I can firmly say that I'm still Catholic today due to St. Ambrose and that Catholic school environment that I went to. So even though my faith practice kind of waned over the years, it was my memory of that time at St. Ambrose, amongst other things, that helped bring me back to the faith. So grew up in Houston, big sports fan. I guess you could say that was probably my idol growing up, big time Oilers fan. Loved Warren Moon and, Haywood Jeffries and Ernest Gibbons and all those guys, Bubba McDowell, Ray Childress, Love You Blue, all that stuff. And then went to high school, St. Thomas High School. I did all right there, but I was getting kind of burned out academically, and I knew I needed a break from school. I knew I wanted to finish my education at some point, but I was just kind of really burned out on the whole academic school environment. So I had a couple of buddies in high school, one who's since passed away, may rest in peace, but they were going into the Marine Corps, and they knew I played rugby and I ran track. So they figured, hey, this guy is athletic. He's a tough dude. He's had military people in his family before. Let's see if he's interested in joining. So they told me about the Marine Corps, and it was senior year, and I hadn't really decided too much on what I was going to do. And one of their recruiters showed up one day after I got done playing pickup basketball, talked to me. I liked the uniform. I knew it was going to be something productive for the country. I didn't want to just graduate high school and become a bum or a leech on society or anything like that. So I figured I can do something service-oriented. It's in my family. It'll give back to the country. Probably I'll get some money for education and whatnot on the back end. Hey, let's do it. I think I even shocked the recruiter by, how much I was willing to go in. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I took a pre-ASVAB test, scored a perfect score on that, and then they had me take the real ASVAB after that. And at the time, I think the max you could get was a 99 on the test, and I scored a 98 out of 99. So, the recruiters were looking at me like straight gold, like, man, we got one here. And I didn't know anything about intelligence at the time. People in my family had been either logistics. My dad had been 101st Airborne. So I didn't really know too much about, military occupational specialties or anything like that. The recruiters mentioned intelligence because my stepfather had mentioned it. He said, you got a really smart guy here. You need to find a good billet for him. My stepfather had been in the military a long time. So he was like, don't just give him some trash billet to go into. You need to give him something of significance to work in. So they gave me the intel pitch. They don't really get too many of those. As far as their quotas are concerned, they only have so many of those spots open up, but they had one open up, and that's what I went into. And it was kind of funny because I asked some of the other recruiters there what it was all about, and none of them had any idea because none of them were from an intel occupational specialty, and they didn't even know anybody in an intel occupational specialty in the Marine Corps. So I kind of went into it blind, but it sounded exciting, and so that's what I went for. And it was great. My time in the Marine Corps was great. Intel school out in Virginia Beach was great. Learned a lot there. I'd say a lot of the lessons I learned at the Nimitz I carried with me throughout my Marine Corps career. And really, that was kind of the foundational training for me as an intelligence professional that carried me out throughout my entire career. And I'd have to say, of the places I went for training, as far as intelligence is concerned, that was the best one, and I probably would not have succeeded in other places without that training. And then obviously the requisite experience from being a Marine out in the field, deployed to Iraq twice, and then stationed overseas before that in Japan. So just the fleet experience, learning from guys in the field who'd been there before, and then just that foundation from that training school was really that really propelled me forward, and that carried me through for almost 20 years in the, intelligence community.
So how long were you in the Marines total?
Total 5 years, and then they have an active reserve after that, which is really not anything. You show up once a year for muster. I mean, that's really all you have to do, and then be willing to be called back if they need you, which for my occupational specialty, there was a pretty good shot that I'd be called back, but I wasn't ever called back during my time. They have like recruitment pitches where they try to get you to come back in, where they throw out, staff sergeant promotion and some other things at you. But I never bit on any of those because by that point I was already working in the intel community as a contractor, making pretty good money for, a 23, 24-year-old who didn't have a college degree yet, just off of the straight intelligence community experience in my time in the Marine Corps.
So when you got out of the Marines, what did you do? And you didn't go straight to the FBI. You did other things. So
No.
Walk us through that.
Yeah, so after the Marine Corps, I got out for a few months, and I had some buddies who had gone and worked as contractors up in the D.C. area, and they were working for DIA. And so they just, out of the blue, called me, said, hey, man, like, you're really good in the Marine Corps, really great analyst. Like, would you consider coming up to D.C., working as a contractor with DIA? So I said, yeah, sure. I'm in limbo. I'm in between. My clearance is still good, which is the goal, as far as being an intelligence professional. As long as your clearance is active, you're employable, as long as you didn't do anything terrible. For some folks, they can do terrible things and they're still employed. But I told them, yeah, sure. Had an interview with BAE Systems and got hired on as a contractor with the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I worked on that job for several months. And then the nature of the contracting world is you'll get on a contract for a while, but as soon as it's up, unless they have something else for you to work on, you're kind of like hopping from contract to contract, so to speak. So I worked for DIA for roughly a year, and then I ended up kind of bouncing around for a while after that, which is kind of cool because it gives you a flavor for the different agencies in the intel community. Like, intel community has, I think it's 17 total member agencies, which most Americans are not aware of, that there are 17 intelligence organizations that work for the United States government. Most people are familiar with CIA, maybe NSA, or even FBI to a certain extent, but they're not aware of, say, DIA or the combatant commands and their their intelligence components that they have. And just there's the director of national intelligence. So there are a bunch of other different intelligence agencies that make up the whole apparatus. So I bounced around for a little while getting a flavor. There's TSA, Office of Intelligence. I worked for them for a while, getting to work with the watch list and seeing how that whole thing is compiled. Yeah, pretty interesting processes. Looking behind the curtain, so to speak, with aviation security, how secure we are, how secure we're not. So just an eye-opening experience.
I bet.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little crash course on what intelligence work means in general? Because that will lead us into what you ultimately did with the FBI.
Right. So just mentioning the term intelligence can encompass a lot of things. For my role in the Marine Corps as I was an all-source intelligence analyst. So what that means is I'm looking at information from multiple injects. So it could be signals intelligence, which is primarily NSA, but then each of the military combatant commands has their own native signals intelligence capability. All intelligence, as far as the history of the United States intelligence community is concerned, the Office of Naval Intelligence is actually the oldest one. I think it dates back to about 1881 was their formal setup date. But they have all these different, they call them INTs, or intelligence disciplines. So there's signals intelligence, which is SIGINT. Then there's MASINT, which is measurement and signatures intelligence, which is like readouts from different radars and aircraft. And there are ways to detect, atmospheric disturbances and that sort of thing. Basically just a gamut of like scientific and technical means of intelligence or information collection, from what time the tides come in, what time they go out, to, temperature fluctuations in different zones of the planet or near installations and what that might mean. So that's MASINT. And then you have IMINT, which is imagery intelligence. So that's like satellite photos, that's photos from aircraft. And you have a whole group of professionals who are trained up in that to do nothing but photographic interpretation of shots from outer space, shots from aircraft, and they can literally determine from the pictures and shadows and whatnot what you're looking at in that particular, photo. There's HUMINT, which is the oldest one, human intelligence. So that's your normal running source networks. So like FBI is big into HUMINT. That's their main ent, so to speak, other than criminal investigation. On the intelligence side of the house is human intelligence. So they're running sources. They're trying to find out information, from whatever their target or mission set is. CIA is big into that as well. Really, it's like the intel community is a leviathan. It's pretty gigantic, and it can be everything from like direct operations to like, an analyst sitting in a cube, at Bolling Air Force Base, going blind, looking at, newspaper clippings from the 80s, so it's such a wide gamut.
Right.
And there's literally, 100,000 plus professionals in the intelligence community.
Do you have sort of a specialty within intelligence?
My specialty, the joke is, in the Marine Corps, and then it kind of carried throughout my professional career, is with all source analysts, we're jacks of all trades, masters of none. So what we get really good or proficient at is taking essentially what all the different stovepipe intel disciplines provide and then making sense of it all. So taking the reports from the signals intelligence guys, taking the HUMINT reports, imagery reports, any open source information from the press. So it could be investigative reporters, it could be think tanks, college, university, papers, that sort of thing. Taking all that information and trying to make sense of it for a specific mission set or target set that we've been, charged to work on.
So you're combining information on a macro level and distilling it down for a particular purpose, as opposed to other analysts might be focused more on a micro level of data sources and data analysis. Is that fair?
Right, to a certain extent, yeah. And it just depends on what you're tasked with, because in the intel world, there's tactical, operational, and strategic. And then there's different analysts that work primarily with each one. So for me professionally, primarily my lane was tactical and then operational intelligence. But as an analyst, you still have a responsibility for maintaining an awareness of what's going on strategically. So even though there may be analysts who are tasked specifically with generating strategic analysis, there's ones who are, tasked with primarily doing tactical analysis, you want to maintain awareness of all of them just so you have a general grasp of what's going on so that you don't get so far into the weeds that you lose the overall big picture.
So how does this eventually bring you to the FBI?
So it's interesting, the journey to the FBI. I never really set out, purposely, I have to make it to the FBI one day. I kind of cut my teeth as an intelligence professional and in the Marine Corps. And primarily we did what's called order of battle analysis, and that was for the Iraq War, to where we're learning different tank divisions, infantry divisions, and that sort of thing. Everything from their, line and block org chart to who their commanders are, to any, human intelligence that comes in on their commanders and their tendencies and that sort of thing. But in the middle of the war, it kind of switched, and we went to more of a counterinsurgency, counterterrorism approach. And I really enjoyed doing that work, and that's building up dossiers and target packages and link analysis and that sort of thing. And so I kind of fell in love with doing that in the Marine Corps. And I kind of figured if I'm going to do that, professionally continuing on, where can I do that in the American intelligence apparatus? But that doesn't continuously send me overseas, because I was in the Marine Corps from 2000 to 2005. And so I was there for the beginning of the Iraq War, for the original invasion in 2003, and then again for counterinsurgency operations in the Anbar province in 2004. And so the writing was kind of on the wall. If I was going to stay in the Marine Corps, I was pretty much going to be living in either Iraq or Afghanistan for like the next 7, 8, however many years it was going to take. And I'd already been deployed twice. I'd been stationed overseas before that. And I was kind of getting to the point where it's like, I don't want to just permanently live overseas, fighting terrorism, or supporting the fight against terrorism this close. I'd rather do it on American soil. Where can I do that? So for me, naturally, I kind of figured that mission set fell under the FBI, because that is one of their mission sets. And I was like, this would be great to be able to do this type of work, but on American soil. So I always had that thought in the back of my head that it would be great to eventually work for the FBI, but I wouldn't say I purposely set out, I have to work for the FBI. So my contracting experience, I started working for DIA. That was like counterproliferation, dual use technology, that sort of thing. And then after that, I ended up working for the Army, what's called Army Information and Security Command. And I supported a mission set that they had working counterterrorism for a while. And then after that, it transitioned to TSA OI, which was watch list, looking at terrorists and databases and that sort of thing, making sure there weren't nefarious characters getting onto flights, checking out security reports from airports across the nation. So my resume, in a way, was kind of building up to the point where I ultimately ended up working for an FBI JTTF. But it kind of took like a matriculation to get to that point. So there was the counterterrorism, counterinsurgency work I did in the Marine Corps. And there's kind of this buildup working with these various alphabet agencies, kind of slices or portions of the counterterrorism mission set, but not whole hog. And so eventually what happened was, after I got done with TSA Office of Intelligence, the contract ended. They were turning our positions into government positions. At that time, I didn't want to become a government employee because the pay cut was pretty significant from what I was making as a contractor. Mm-hmm. And our program lead for the time, for the company I was working for, SM Consulting, which is now defunct, they said they had a contract open up working with the FBI at the Hoover Building. And so I jumped at the opportunity. Of course, I had to do an interview process with them so that it made sense for them to bring me on. And then I had to also go through a polygraph. Up until that point, I had a TSSCI clearance, but I'd never done a polygraph because the work I'd done with the Marine Corps and these other agencies, they didn't require a poly to work on their, mission set cases or anything like that. The FBI wanted that. So I had to go through that whole process, went through the process, and eventually I got on board. And the first unit I was with there, it was called PACU, and it's essentially what's called the PAL line now, so the public access line. So any and all complaints that the public dumps on the FBI, through their web portal, this unit was processing. So that was the first unit I ended up working with for the Bureau at Hoover. And it was just kind of like drinking from a fire hose. And of course, you see the whole gamut of complaints or allegations and that sort of thing from a bunch of these people are like tinfoil hat wearing folks, so it gets pretty entertaining reading through all the complaints, but over time your eyes start to bleed out because you're just going blind from looking at this screen all day. And then from there, I actually, that contract ended, but the FBI managers there wanted to try to maintain me. And so I ended up out at an offsite working at a unit called T-REX, which is the Terrorism Review and Examination Unit. So that kind of fell in the wheelhouse a bit of what I was doing with TSA Office of Intelligence. It's just now I was on the other end of it where I was actually able to look at the actual FBI cases, of the individuals where I would have encountered it before from the TSA OI angle. This person's traveling through your airport. And I'd get a snippet of the information. Now working for the FBI, you get to see all the information. And then that also works with the watch list. So we're getting watch list submissions, nominations from FBI field agents and task force officers for the subjects of investigation that, they're looking at. And part of our job was essentially just a quality control. Does this person, meet the standard or merit being put on the watch list? So it's really this funnel where I'm getting to look at like the types of cases that the FBI has as far as counterterrorism world is concerned. Some CI, but mostly counterterrorism. So that was a pretty unique lens as well. And it's there working for T-REX that I actually met my wife, which is kind of funny. She comes from an FBI family. Her dad was an agent for 26 years. May you rest in peace. One of the jokes around the house right now or with my mother-in-law, we wish he was still here, but they're like, if dad was still alive, what's going on now with the FBI would definitely kill him. Like he would be dying every day watching what's happened, to the FBI. So it's best he went when he did. Yeah. So yeah, my wife, she worked for the Bureau for 20 years. Her dad was an agent for 26 years. I met her there. Interestingly enough, she had Texas ties. She grew up partly in the Houston area, but she was born just outside of Los Angeles. Being essentially an FBI brat, conceived in New Mexico, born in Los Angeles, spent time in DC, and then ended up in Houston, which is where she went to high school. And then she went to University of Houston and graduated. So we meet in DC though, but we both have these Houston ties. So it's kind of funny to us, or maybe it's Providence that these two Houstonians meet in Washington, DC at this terrorist unit.
I think it's very significant that not only you have your patriotic history here with the Marines and all these different agencies and you end up at the FBI, but you married an FBI brat, and her father was 26 years, she's 20 years. I mean, you're steeped in this from every angle, which makes your testimony and your role in the whole controversy that we're going to talk about even more significant. You're not just some weird outsider that popped in one day and complained and then left. It's not that at all.
Right.
So I didn't know that about your wife and your father-in-law, but I think that's great to know.
Yeah.
So tell us how you get down to the Charlotte office, which we're near Charlotte and it's significant to us. And I've known agents from the Charlotte office. I even not even interview's not the right word, but interviewed about interviewing when I was a law clerk for a federal judge. They like hiring young lawyers. Mm-hmm. So one of the guys asked me if I was interested in applying, and I said, well, I'll interview about interviewing. And then after the interview about interviewing, I said, it's not for me.
Right.
But it was, it's flattering and it's cool and it's intriguing,
Right.
So, but the Charlotte office is very active. It's a very well-respected office nationwide.
Right.
It's had some very significant involvement, even if I remember, the Unabomber, I think when they caught him, I think the Charlotte office had a significant role there.
Right.
So it's a significant office. So, but eventually you end up there. Tell us how that happened and then what you did there.
Right. Yeah. So about 2010 timeframe, end up transferring down to the Charlotte field office, but my wife transfers, but there's no spot for me. And my wife and I, it's really important or big for us that somebody is home to take care of the kids. So at that time, it made sense that, okay, you need to finish your degree. I'm the one who got the transfer down to the Charlotte field office. You do the stay-at-home dad thing for a while you're finishing up your degree, and then we'll go from there.
Which one's harder to take on, the FBI or a house full of kids?
I have to tell you, man, good grief.
Sorry.
I'll tell you that, the stay-at-home dad thing was pretty cool, but it gave me a different, my opinion, like, it's supposed to be stay-at-home mom, not stay-at-home dad. I understand.
You were out of your element.
Yeah, I understand that, like, some people are in situations where that just ends up, that's the case. But really, it's like God made us man and woman, and there are certain roles that we need to naturally be in.
So it was your hardest deployment ever.
And mercy. I tell my wife all the time, and I tell other women too, I'm like, man, I have a lot of respect for you because I would go to the playground, and, at the time my daughter was very little. She was, only a year old, and I took care of her from 1 through 5, basically. And, man, good grief. And I would lug her around. Well, I'm a dude. I have testosterone. So, like, my muscles are just getting bigger as I'm, hauling around this sack of potatoes. But I'm seeing these moms, like these little 100 and nothing, like, waifs or whatever. And they're, like, wrangling these kids around. And I'm just like, good grief. I'm like, I don't know how these chicks are doing it, man. I'm like, this is wild.
I'm
So I'm like, I'm getting, my muscles are getting big, but I'm just like, how are you doing this? You're like 105 pounds.
I'm telling you, Marcus, I'm twice the size of my wife. I can lift 3 times the amount of weight of her as she can. But if we had a baby holding contest, she would demolish me.
Yeah.
She can hold babies from any angle, like, of course, on the hip, but just like probably out, straight out. Yeah. She can hold a baby 5 times as long as I can. I collapse in exhaustion.
Yeah.
I don't know how she does it.
Yeah. It's really wild. But for me, it was a great experience too.
Yeah.
Because I got to spend a lot of time
That's
with my
wonderful.
daughter.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
And then dads and daughters just have a unique bond anyway. It's like moms and sons, dads and daughters. So it's like, my oldest daughter and I, we have a really, really strong bond.
And she was confirmed recently.
Bishop Jacques, Diocese of Charleston came up. Our Lady of Grace, Father Kirby, great parish. She was confirmed. It was really emotional for her. She started crying. I almost teared up.
Beautiful.
Those are our new Christian warriors and disciples going forth out into pagan world and trying to make more disciples, right?
So your wife's at the Charlotte office, and then how do you get there? And then tell us what you did there.
Right. So about 2015, the FBI has all these different hiring initiatives. So once in the intel community, it's kind of, my experience is kind of weird. You're at other places and other people will talk about, do you know anybody from the FBI? Have you ever been over to the FBI? And I'd talk to people and almost nobody had any experience. People would have experience of working with different agencies, but I didn't really run into too many like former FBI people like at other places. So it's kind of like even within the intelligence community, it's kind of like the CIA and FBI. Like those are the two big known names that everyone talks about. So it's interesting once you get behind the wall of the FBI and you kind of see what's going on there. There's a bunch of different feelings. Some of it is the emperor has no clothes, who will tell? But then you become familiar with the different hiring initiatives that they have. They have military hiring initiatives. They have prior law enforcement hiring initiatives. They have initiatives where they're looking for people with legal background or lawyers. But then they also have like some niche ones where they go after college kids, honors kids, and then they have one called friends and family. And it's kind of an internal thing where it's like, if you know anybody that's connected to you, familial, friend circle wise, who you think, resume wise would be a good fit for working here, like submit all your resumes. And so what happens is essentially it ends up in like a resume pile with the ASACs and the SACs, and they make a determination based on the pile, like who they'd like to talk to. Naturally, with my background and then already having worked for the FBI, like really good shot of getting on board. Yeah. And so that's what happened was I ended up talking to the ASAC and some of the supervisory intelligence analysts there and interviewing against several other candidates and ended up at the top of the heap. So that's how I ended up coming onto the FBI full-time as an actual employee versus a contractor. Now there's a whole bunch of, the government a lot of times doesn't cross the T and dot the I on certain things. So it's kind of funny, when I started and I got on board, I had been out of government office spaces for about 5 years. But when I got back on board, like, my profile from my time as a contractor was like still in the system and was still live. Like, it hadn't been purged at all. And I'd been out of, service, so to speak, for 5 years. So there was confusion between my old profile and then my new profile that didn't get fixed, right, for several months after I started. So my emails were going, which way or the other. And it was a cluster.
Yeah.
But, once I got on board with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which made sense based on my background, which again doesn't always happen with folks joining the Bureau. The Bureau is notorious for, recruiting somebody who maybe speaks Mandarin, and then they get on board and they're working like street gangs for like 4 to 5 years. And people are scratching their head and thinking, we hired this guy because he spoke Mandarin. Like, why is he working street gangs now? But that happens more often than not, where people get put into lanes that's not what they were originally recruited for. So that's just like one of many issues.
So were you an agent? Is that a proper term?
No. So I was what's called a staff operations specialist. So we fall on like the support side of the house. So they have the special agents, and then there's a whole block of people, because we have so many, or the Bureau has so many task forces. So there's task force officers who are trained up, and they're attached to FBI, task forces, and they can be in FBI workspace. So they'll spend 50% of their time in our workspace, and then 50% of their time with their parent agency, or whatever the memorandum of understanding or letter of agreement between the agencies is. That's how much time they're going to be spending in our workspace. So we have there are a lot of agents, but there are also a lot of other people in the organization who fill critical or vital roles. So my role fell within the intelligence program.
I see.
And then they have professional staff as well, who are primarily like administrative or logistical professionals and that sort of thing.
You were Employee of the Year for the Charlotte office in 2019. So you must have been pretty good at your job.
I'd like to think so. That one came out of left field. I wasn't even expecting to get that award or anything like that. And I think even my direct supervisor was surprised by it, because I believe it was one of the ASACs at the time who put me in for the award. So when the award came down, I was in total shock. But like that year, I'd been working pretty hard. I'd taken on an ancillary role as a critical incident operations specialist, which essentially means if there's like a missing child or abduction or any other kind of critical event that pops up, I agreed to go with the crisis case agent and whatever that team was to help stand up a command post or to help out with whatever those critical incidents were in the operations surrounding them. So on top of my intel role, I also had that critical incident role.
So this brings us up to what year, when the pertinent situation of the January 6th controversy arose. What year was?
Right. So January 6, 2021 is when the Capitol riot occurred. I would say folks in general knew things were a bit like off just in general in society. And then probably starting with 2020 when COVID-19 hit.
Right.
And then we had this quote unquote summer of love and all the riots that took place across the country.
Summer of love, yeah.
Quote unquote,
right.
Seattle, Portland,
yeah.
Wisconsin.
Baltimore.
Yeah, Baltimore. Number of cities across the nation where there were riots and that sort of thing going on.
Yeah.
And we were kind of our approach was more of an informational one where we weren't really going out and opening up a lot of cases on people involved with these incidents. For the most part, with state and locals who are handling a lot of those incidents, even though some of them maybe would have reached the threshold where there could have been federal involvement. It was kind of a hands-off approach, which caused people to scratch their heads because we'd set up command posts throughout the summer, but there was very little enforcement activity from our standpoint, other than maybe bomb text lending, the local PD some support, something of that nature. But as far as actual investigations, it was a very much a hands-off approach.
And your life changed, I guess was it in 2021?
2021.
And when you began to feed information up the food chain, and that's when everything came crashing down. Tell us what happened.
Right. Yep. So after the Capitol riot, all kinds of stories coming out. We're getting a massive amount of leads and complaints and allegations come in through our systems, and folks are naturally going out and working those leads and complaints, which is a very different approach to what was taken, to the quote unquote summer of love. So people found that to be kind of, head scratching and odd. I don't think folks really had too many hang-ups with folks who maybe got caught on camera and they're like literally beating a police officer or something of that nature. But for the misdemeanor charges with trespassing and like parading and that sort of thing, folks were scratching their heads because the Bureau doesn't normally go after people on misdemeanor charges like that. And then especially in a situation where there was a lot of confusion and people literally didn't know they weren't supposed to be on certain portions of the Capitol grounds, or confusion around Leos holding the doors open for them so that they could enter the building.
Leos.
Law enforcement officers. Yep. DC Capitol police officers holding doors open so that people could go inside of the Capitol itself. So for us locally, and I think enterprise-wide, there was a lot of confusion of, we don't normally go after misdemeanors. This is a very unique situation in that scores of people didn't realize they were trespassing, didn't realize there were barricades, and then there's mixed messages coming from law enforcement on the grounds where doors are being held open and smiles and pictures and people waving.
There's videos that we've seen where they're literally escorting people through the Capitol building into different offices of the Capitol building and toward the main chamber where, what do you call the main chamber within the Capitol building?
Within Congress, yeah.
Kevin, what's that main building, the big room called where they have the State of the Union address in the Capitol building? I don't know. Rotunda? Is that
Rotunda?
It? No. Okay. Anyway, that's where I think the Rotunda is where they have the statues and everything out in the main. Anyway, nonetheless, the big main place. I'm gonna wake up at 2:00 in the morning. Anyway, but
the inner chambers.
Yeah. So people were escorted even into there.
Right.
By law enforcement.
Right. So just the whole scene is kind of head scratching. And then for us, it was during the summer of love, it was very much a hands-off approach. And then all of a sudden now it's kind of like this, hey, diddle up the middle, go get them, go chase down grandma and grandpa and everybody else who was on the Capitol grounds that day, which, okay, we have to look at the initial complaint, but it's like, really? Like, we're really going to be going after grandma and grandpa here? So what I started doing, part of my job, situational awareness, is we look at open source information, which can include investigative reporters articles, news articles from different agencies and that sort of thing. Essentially, it's raw information. And so I was passing along raw information that, hey, there's a different story to what took place this day for background, images like we're describing here of law enforcement holding doors open for people, smiling with people in pictures, just things that are kind of mitigating factors for a lot of these situations. And I'm kind of sending these, over time for situational awareness, to which the mood, I would say, in the workspace kind of changed, where there was an initial apprehension, but then there was kind of word from on high. So like our management chain got word from the deputy director that if there's anybody that has any issues with working these cases, you let them know that I'll talk to them directly and they can deal with me. And so there's kind of like this, you will follow orders kind of chilling effect that negated a lot of dissent that was naturally occurring, where it's like, okay, you don't want to end up on the naughty list, so just put your head down and do what you're told. And then lower level management like our ASACs and SAC like pushed that as well. But there was also kind of this divide to where it seemed like there were meetings that were occurring that not everybody was being invited to. And so there were meetings that were occurring with like the agents where the intelligence component wasn't getting invited to the same meeting. And I would hear grumblings kind of, coming out of these meetings where it's like, keep your head down, just do what you're told, stay off the radar. We don't want any headquarters attention. So that was kind of the mantra that the agents, at least locally, were getting, because I was friends with several of them. They're like, we're just being told to put our heads down, stay off the radar, don't say anything. We don't want headquarters attention, just do what you're told. And for the most part, most people just did like what they were told. And so I very much started to get the sense that me sending the open source articles was kind of like irritating to some people, because I was starting to get the side eye from some of the other investigators. There's hushed conversations in hallways. I had a couple of friends talk to me on the side where they told me specifically, hey man, like, I agree with you 100% on what you're doing. Just to let you know, not everybody here is appreciative of what you're doing. So just kind of like watch your back, so to speak.
All right. So let's dive in a little bit more about, quote, what you were doing. Now let's go back to the head scratching you mentioned about the Summer of Love. People are rioting. The feds aren't doing anything about that, but the Capitol building, they're hunting down every grandma and grandpa who were there, being
right.
escorted into the building by by law enforcement.
Right.
So, but immediately what my brain does is said, okay, well, most of that Summer of Love, those were state issues,
right?
But the Capitol building is on federal grounds, so
right.
federal agencies should be engaged in investigating this, and the FBI is investigators,
right?
And there was clearly crimes. I mean, there's also video of people like breaking in through the doors,
right?
So the FBI should be. Furthermore, the accusation was that this is an insurrection,
right?
And so the FBI has to investigate that, right? So I mean,
right.
So it does seem that the height of, having a bunch of riots,
right,
in Baltimore is different than
right.
people like, quote unquote, storming the Capitol. So, you would agree that there is a different level of scrutiny that a federal agency needs to give to a crime that's happening on federal grounds.
Right.
Right.
Right. And then there's the Portland courthouse incident as well, where it's like that one was maybe handled with a little bit more apprehension from, that's one of the comparisons that's
right.
made, is like, well, what about the Portland courthouse? And obviously the Capitol, symbolically for
right.
your nation and country
right.
is a larger symbol for your country and the portrayal of security and that sort of thing than
right.
the Portland federal courthouse.
Sure.
But it just kind of fed into the idea of, we didn't chase these people down, and crimes occurred here on our city streets, but we're going to chase these folks down for trespassing charges and going into buildings
right.
where federal law enforcement officers, DC police, are holding the doors open for them and waving at them and
right.
smiling at them and that sort of
right.
thing.
And that's on camera, but the
right.
media didn't show that for a while.
No.
So back to what you were doing, okay, the quote unquote, what you were doing, and people gave you warnings. Hey, be careful here. I agree with what you're doing, but the higher levels don't appreciate it.
Right.
This open source information, you're gathering information from journalists, from the emails that are submitted through whatever database they
right.
have to submit. And are these firsthand accounts of people saying, hey, I was there and this guy was arrested? But, are they describing a situation and you're taking that? The journalists are doing the same thing. Like, what is this information that you're getting?
Right. So a lot of it is literally social media, like screen captures of people like smiling with police officers, taking pictures with police officers, or it's like their video shorts and stills of walking through the doors, but like the officers are like waving and smiling at them. And then there's also video clips of people praying, holding hands and that sort of thing. And then the DC police line shooting the pepper ball sprays into the crowd while they're standing there praying and that sort of thing. So it very much gives the appearance of potential instigation of the crowd to get them to boil over.
Right.
So it's images of that nature where it's people's, smartphone, Twitter posts, Facebook streaming posts and that sort of thing. And then it's investigative journalists and their captures of who is this on the grounds this day? This looks like potentially some kind of professional actor or paid actor. When we challenged them, they turned and ran away. There's pictures of what looks to be Antifa types changing into, quote unquote, Trump gear in the bushes to then go and stir things up. So it's images of this nature that I'm sharing with, the investigators on the squad.
So are you going into work, getting your cup of coffee, sitting down at your desk, and then are you just doing Google searches for this, or are you reviewing data that has been submitted to you?
I'm reviewing data that's been submitted, and then I'm also doing like situational awareness of what's going on, like open source. And so it's information like amplifying data, and then it's the images of what's going on. And this is where I was at. This is what I was doing at the Capitol this day. This is what I saw.
Were you starting to draw conclusions after seeing data and more data that the official narrative coming out of the FBI from higher ups was false? Is that what was giving you concern?
The thing that was giving me concern was I very much had the sense that there was a certain narrative that was getting painted that wasn't exactly the most accurate picture of what we were seeing. And there were a number of other internal hangups as well. So for our investigation, there was video camera footage of the Capitol grounds, but they were being very restrictive, even internally, with what camera footage we were even allowed to get.
Really?
And we would have to send in requests to the DC office in order to get footage of certain sectors, and then it would take a while for the request to come back because they were curating the clips that were coming back to the field offices. And the general excuse was, security of, the annex. So we don't want to let all of you have unfettered access to the video footage. Well, that kind of upset people as well, because it's like, we all have clearances here. We've all been vetted. Like, who we are. Every action we do on the computers, or our smartphone devices is tracked. Like, why are you not trusting us with having access to the camera footage of what happened on the grounds that day? So that was another interesting issue that upset people. Like, why are you not giving us the unfettered access to the video footage,
around the Capitol building?
Around the Capitol building for the event. And especially when it came to, crimes for individual, or alleged crimes for individual people, where it's like, hey, can I get the camera footage for this area? Because this is the area that allegedly the person I'm looking at was in. And there would even be hangups with that. And there very much was a curation process that was going on where they had some kind of a team at Washington field office that was doing whatever to the video footage before they then sent it out to the investigators.
So they were scrubbing it. They were
right.
What's the phrase when you black out things on a document?
Redacting.
Redacting videos.
Right.
And if I was talking to an agent from the DC field office, would they say, well, of course we did, because this is our territory and these, guys down at Charlotte need to mind their own business?
I wouldn't necessarily say so, because that's like documentary evidence. And you would think these are, sworn law enforcement officers, like you can hand over the requisite documentary evidence. And we have enough handling systems internally to where that information could be put in a certain portal for people to assess and analyze. And a lot of these systems, everything's documented and audited and checked. So whatever you do on any of these systems, they have your username and that sort of thing. So,
but what was every office in the country? Every office in the country have a Marcus Allen staff operations officer and specialist and just gets to investigate it willy nilly, or was there a coordinated thing? Like, why would you be able to get the footage from? Like, were you assigned to research this, or how's that work?
Right. So because I was on a joint terrorism task force and it got designated essentially a domestic terrorism event, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force enterprise-wide were the natural investigative landing spot for that.
So you're not a nosy specialist in the Charlotte office.
No.
Just saying, hey, give me stuff. I'm with the FBI. I want to see everything.
Right.
You're actually tasked with investigating on this task force.
Right.
This because it was deemed a domestic terrorist event. You were on that task force. This was your job. You had to get the data. You had to get the footage. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So all that. So it naturally fell within our investigative wheelhouse to look at all this information and to get amplifying data. And you wouldn't have thought that the open source information would have rankled feathers, because we do investigations based off of open source information. Sometimes it's the initial inject point on an investigation in and of itself, which which working at the Charlotte field office, you have plenty of investigations where you're always looking at social media or open source images and videos that come out around events to try to get a better feel for what really took place, at a certain event.
During this first stage where you are gathering the open source information, you're requesting video footage from the Capitol. You're being denied. You're being sent redacted videos. In this early stage, were you seeing evidence that there were FBI agents or officials or assets, FBI affiliates on the ground in the footage, and you're saying, wait a minute, there's one, or was that later when you discovered that?
Right. So that whole aspect has to do with when those types of events happen, we usually have like assets that are there. So it's just common knowledge, at least amongst the task forces, that anytime there's an event of that nature that's going on, it's like there was kind of a sense within the Bureau, at least within the JTTFs and some elements of Washington, D.C. field office, DTOS and that sort of thing, something was going to happen. So anytime these events go on, and if you work domestic terrorism in the Bureau, there's always kind of an APB of, does anybody have anyone that's going to be, at this event? And the concern there is always like a public safety, public security concern. And you're always working hand in hand with like local or state or any other law enforcement elements that are there on the ground. So it's just kind of a known. If there's going to be some kind of a hot button political event or major, sporting event or something like that, where there could be harm that occurs to a large amount of people, and there's public safety concerns, there's going to be some kind of FBI assets there, some kind of either sources or something otherwise of that nature there. And they'll usually send out basically like an APB type communication to the different requisite units and whatnot, like, is anybody going to this type of an event? And so that's just kind of like, it goes without saying that of course there's going to be people on the grounds that day. So when some of the initial reports of denying that there were FBI assets or anything like that there, just on its face, you can easily deduce that that's not true. Because especially an event of that size, that had all the Stop the Steal rallies, that were pre-planned, and, events and protests that were pre-planned, you just knew because of how much, angst there was over the results of the 2020 election, how upset people were, and a bunch of the challenges weren't being granted standing and that sort of thing, that something was going to bubble over. So for people in DT world, if you had a brain, you knew something potentially could happen. This was an event that we were naturally going to have people at. So for Big Bureau, and the press to say initially, they don't know how many, sources were there, or they're not sure if there were any there, on its face is not true, because there are smaller events where there are people that are there. So that right there just kind of tells you, it kind of, sets off a whistle or an alarm bell in your head where you're like, well, I know that's patently not true, because there's lesser events where there are people, there. So like, why would you just not cop to that? Just say, yeah, we normally have folks at large hot button events because we're worried about public safety. We don't want things to spill over out of control. So we naturally have some kind of eyes and ears out there to let us know if anything is going to get crazy out there, so we can coordinate and work with local law enforcement to try to head something off or prevent any kind of, cataclysmic event from happening. So on its face, it was like, that's not true, because this is standard business practice that not that many people are unaware of, who track federal law enforcement conduct at big events.
When did it become known to you that an inordinate amount of informants or assets were present?
I would say after there were many allegations coming out on the internet, and then just the proliferation of people, who are suspicious of, like this guy looks like law enforcement. I would guess it wasn't until after, I was always suspicious that there probably was a large contingent, but I didn't know definitively. The tell for me was how hard they were protecting the information around people being there, and that didn't really make sense.
Yeah.
And then obviously late 2024 with IG Horowitz and that sort of thing, they started releasing more of how many informants were there.
Do you know?
I don't know the specific number, but one of the numbers that they copped to, I believe, was around at least 18. But from court documents and that sort of thing, I'd read some investigative journalist stories where defense attorneys for J6 defendants had identified at least 83, not just exclusively FBI assets, but 83 informants, cutouts, could be undercovers, folks there at the behest of the government. So that's the number I'm pretty confident is at least 83. I believe with Horowitz, what they eventually copped to post-election was around 18, but I might be off in that number. And personal opinion is probably more than that.
Yeah.
But that's what they were willing to cop to.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much. Did you reach any kind of conclusion, or do you know anyone who did, that some of these assets or informants or agents were actually instigating the behavior at January 6th versus just sitting there and watching?
I don't have like any definitive information on that. Right.
Yeah. Because having 83 people just standing in the crowd watching is one thing.
Right.
Having 18 who are there to instigate is a whole nother thing.
Right.
So, Kevin, I forget the guy's name that we talked.
Ray Epps.
Ray Epps.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that clip, Kevin?
Yeah, you want to play it?
I want to just play it and take a look. I mean, you can comment if you want. You don't have to, but
Right.
it's just an interesting situation. And Kevin, you want to explain why we're looking at this guy?
Well, he was there the night before, instigating, saying we're going to go to the Capitol. We're going to go inside the Capitol, take it. People started identifying. They called him out as a Fed on the spot. And then he was videotaped again the next day. And actually, right before the barricades were breached, he was last seen on camera whispering into somebody else's ear right at the front of the barricades, and then the barricades were pushed forward.
So this is a prima facie case of instigation. Like
Right.
that's what we're going to see, and we can see it right here. Ray, what's his name? Ray
Epps.
Epps.
Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol. Into the Capitol. What? No! Peacefully. Fed. We are going to the Capitol, where our problems are. It's that direction. Please spread the word.
Amazing. So a lot of people believe that he was some kind of
a cutout or something, doing, obviously operating on the behest of the federal government, which if you have somebody who's like, third party cutout, it becomes even more difficult to tie it back to who did you do this at the behest of? Like what federal officer, agent, requested that you conduct this sort of activity. And then naturally for that type of activity, because people have claimed that the Capitol riot was some kind of a Reichstag fire type event, some kind of a staged political event to affect, large scale political change, and then to essentially outlaw, a certain political party or a group of people, which it very much has that opinion when you then turn around on the back end of that and you start hunting down every single, grandma and grandpa that was there on the Capitol grounds that day. That lends credence to people, lodging the allegation or the claim that this looks like some sort of a Reichstag fire staged event for political change in the country. So you got Mr. Epps. And with these types of things, there's going to be plausible deniability built into it. So if he ever gets the book thrown at him, it'll just be him. It'll be very difficult to figure out exactly who was paying him, who he did this at the behest of. People can speculate, but to get the actual testimony or the documentary evidence of, yes, we colluded or coordinated with Ray Epps to be there that day, to be, an agitator, to try to instigate things to spill or boil over. That's going to be very difficult to do unless you literally have the human beings involved with the whole thing and somebody in there talks or they have documentary evidence.
Now, they've investigated and arrested and denied trial to many people when you have something that blatant and
Right.
he's never been investigated or prosecuted.
Right. It looks real fishy and suspect, naturally.
So if they're chasing down grandmas for walking in peacefully,
You would naturally think somebody would be going after Mr. Epps. And then you have, the press running cover for Mr. Epps. You have Democrats running cover for Mr. Epps. There are other individuals on the ground that day. There was one individual, I believe an outlet, Revolver News, covered him for a while. They called him Scaffold Commander, was what they titled the individual. And he's literally up on a scaffold with a bullhorn, like imploring and trying to urge people to go into the Capitol to surge forward and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if anything's ever happened to Scaffold Commander or if that's even been investigated vigorously at all. So you have all these anomalies where it's like, we're going after grandma and grandpa, and there are some folks who are literally committing suicide based on the stress of the situation. Their businesses have been ruined, relationships with family and friends have been ruined, but we don't know what's going on with Mr. Epps, and we don't know about this Scaffold Commander guy. So it looks real suspect and real fishy.
and Antifa, you mentioned them earlier.
Right. Yeah, so there are pictures from an outlet called the Gateway Pundit, but they're not the only ones, of individuals in the bushes in all black. They call it the black bloc tactic, where they dress up in all black and they wear masks. Images of them in the bushes donning Trump gear. So it's like they're getting rid of their black garb and they're putting on, Americana looking garb, MAGA hats, that sort of thing. And then conceivably they're then going out amongst the crowd. And there's always agitation between, the Antifa types, and then you have more conservative groups like Proud Boys, other 3%er type groups that are there sometimes. Sometimes they're there to agitate. Sometimes they claim they're there as personal protection for people. Sometimes they're essentially running a line between, peaceful protesters and then black bloc types who might be trying to agitate and that sort of thing. So whenever you see, historically in the past, if you see some kind of agitation or fights that actually break out, you'll see fights like out in Portland or Seattle area that would break out between these Antifa types and then, the more patriotic groups, organized groups, but not amongst the regular protesters. So you can kind of expect that. So when you see them on the scene, you kind of know they're there to agitate or to stir things up. So you would think naturally that, did we investigate everybody in this photo? Were we able to identify everybody in this photo? Presumably if we have footage of all the Capitol grounds, we should be able to maybe identify, from this photo where some of these folks, matriculated or went out into the crowd and what they were doing in the crowd. So you would think you would naturally be honing in on your agitators, but that's not what occurred.
I'm really dumb in these areas, but I mean, who would pay this guy? Let's just say that Ray Epps guy or somebody, or the Scaffold guy. Who's giving them money, and how would they get that money? I mean, you hear about, Antifa being funded by George Soros or whatever. You get these big billionaire guys who just have a political agenda.
Right.
But is it really conceivable that someone high up in the FBI is funneling checks to some other organization and that organization is given these jokers money in order to go and cause problems? I mean, is that the loop that we're really talking about?
I mean, it's conceivable, but they would be working through their cutouts or, little.
You said that a couple times. What's a cutout?
So they could get someone who's a subsource. So they could have a source and then they could establish a subsource. So other human beings that could, create their own little organization or whatever, a little pop-up organization. And then they basically taking the guidance from their original source coordinator, this is what we want to have happen, and then set about achieving that. You'll also see online.
Sounds like a shell organization.
Right.
Okay.
And then what you'll also see sometimes is like on job posting boards and that sort of thing, like I kind of call them like pop-up crowds where they kind of put up, it's like, they're looking for actors or paid performers, and you'll get so many hundreds of dollars to show up.
Really?
For an event. And you'll find it if there's going to be a large political event or something like that. You'll see it sometimes on these job posting boards where it's like, we're looking for, temporary paid professional actors, yada, yada, yada. And
I had no idea.
And we're going to pay you this amount of money to show up. And so some of these people are literally, it's like a pop-up riot. They're getting a couple of $100 or maybe a bus trip or whatever to come out, act the fool, create mayhem, and then roll out. And then you even have, organizations like the National Lawyers Guild. They'll call them the green hats. They'll show up at these events and they'll literally have green hats. I don't know if that's still the preferred tactic, because after my persecution started in 2021, 2022 timeframe, I kind of dropped off from keeping track of a lot of that stuff. But at the time, they're essentially these lawyers who would be at these events, and if people would get arrested, agitating, for usually on the progressive side, they'd give them a card and say, I'll represent you to get you out of jail. And so these protesters are literally showing up, they're getting paid, and then they're getting assurance on the back end, don't worry if you get arrested, we'll take care of you.
All right, so back to the information that you were sending up the food chain. That was really frustrating your office, your employers.
Right.
You weren't focused heavily on this agent informant asset presence in the footage yet, because you hadn't really gotten that.
Right.
So you were seeing other information so it wasn't even that you were exposing this, you were exposing something.
I was exposing the
that.
fact that there was a very different story, than what was being parroted, by the media.
Can you say what those, so if there's two parallel stories, the story you were seeing and the story that was being pushed to the media, what are those two stories?
They're like constantly pushing the insurrection, the insurrection, the insurrection. And interestingly enough, I believe it was late July of 2021, might be a little bit off on the time, but I believe it was late July of 2021. On like a Thursday or a Friday, the FBI officially released that the Capitol riot or incursion, whatever they're referring it to, was not officially an insurrection. So they had been investigating or looking at it as a potential insurrection. But late July of 2021, the FBI officially made an official statement saying that what occurred on January 6, 2021 was not an insurrection. It got drowned because the information was released, I believe it was late on a Friday, which is typical when they want something to get buried. They'll release it late on a Friday, like after 3. But then also there was another event with, I believe it was, there was some kind of domestic terrorism related type, pop-up event that happened or occurred. I believe it was in the Washington, D.C. area with a pickup truck. And so that story kind of clouded out what was going on, that the FBI's official statement on January 6, 2021 was that it was not an insurrection. But I mean, even to this day, I was just doing searches the other day. They call it the insurrection, but it was not an official insurrection at all.
I didn't know that was the official ruling. I mean, I don't really follow this stuff closely because I hate politics, but
and it came out late. I believe it was late July 2021 on like a Friday afternoon, and then there was another story, that was kind of clouding up the pipeline.
So if you're thinking back to kind of what started to get you in trouble, what specifically was that, and how did you get in trouble?
Right. So,
do you need water, by the way? Do you need some water?
Oh, I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going back, let me rephrase that. How you were providing information to your superiors, what was that information that ultimately got you in trouble? Right.
So the information that ultimately got me in trouble was an email I sent on September 29th of 2021. In the email, I essentially stated that I didn't think that the director was being exactly forthright. He had done some testimony where he essentially left it hanging out in the open that there weren't any FBI informants on the Capitol grounds that day.
Okay.
He didn't explicitly say it, but he left it hanging out in the open, giving the implication that there weren't any FBI assets or sources on the grounds that day. And it was covered by the New York Times, and then also, I believe, Revolver News, Darren Beatty spoke about it on a show with Steve Bannon, where in the New York Times article essentially highlighted that there were 2 Proud Boys informants on the way into the Capitol who were real-time back and forth communicating with their FBI agent handlers as they were heading towards the Capitol building. So the story itself contradicted the implication from the director's testimony. And so there had kind of been like, a buildup over time to this point where I just said, hey, I think we need to exercise caution, and in conducting these leads, because we're not getting a forthright answer from the director or leadership in regards to this investigation. And that was the general gist of the email that I sent.
That doesn't sound too inflammatory.
No, and that's the one that sent off like alarm bells and whistles. I remember that morning I was having a conversation with one of the other case agents there, who also had a lot about misgivings about what was going on. And my supervisor came to me because I think the chief division counsel and one of the assistant special agents in charge had called him while he was on the way into work. And he wasn't even fully aware of what the problem was. All he knows from that encounter was the CDC, chief division counsel, and the assistant special agent in charge wanted to have a meeting with me and him. And so he came over and he just kind of nonchalantly told me, hey, when you get done, with your conversation, he's like, just come down to my office. We got to talk about something. So I'm like, okay. But there was no alarm from him or anything like that. And so I ended up going down the hall, and not crazily enough, but providentially enough, I'd had a dream maybe a week before of some kind of conflict with like the FBI or like FBI management or superiors. And there was a whole scene that played out in the dream. And I remember waking up thinking like, that was a really strange dream. What was that all about? And so on the 29th, when I go down the hallway and then I go into my supervisor's office, the scene from my dream is playing out like real time. Like I walk into the room and it's almost like a deja vu experience, because it's like a snapshot from the dream that I had a week before this event even happened. And so, I kind of like almost like smiled, because it was like, okay, God's given me a heads up here of like what's going to happen. This meeting's not necessarily a friendly meeting. It started off under the guise of like it was a friendly meeting, but because I'd had that dream a week before, I knew maybe there was an issue. And the issue that the ASAC had was my questioning the director's testimony, which I had reported the information to my direct chain of command. So I'd sent it to my supervisor, the squad supervisor, the responsible principal agents, and a couple of other intelligence personnel that were working the overall, Capitol riot, domestic terrorism investigation along with me. So everybody I put on the email was somebody in my natural chain of command, and I'd voiced my concern over testimony of the director. Well, that's considered a whistleblower protected disclosure. And the issue that the executive, well, he's not an executive, but the ASAC there had was my questioning the director's testimony, and almost a sense of how dare you question like what the director said. And I stated my case and I said, I'm an intelligence professional, analytical capacity. This is my opinion. This is my recommendation or warning. That's all this is. He came in because the chief division counsel had gotten all in a tizzy about the email, who I copied on the email naturally, because with DT matters, it can get pretty prickly as far as civil liberties concerns, First Amendment issues, and that sort of thing. So anytime in domestic terrorism investigations, you want to make sure that you're taking special care or concern towards civil liberties, First Amendment issues, and that sort of thing. So usually you're going to cut in, if you're smart, you're going to cut in the chief division counsel and then the associate division counsel, which I did to make sure like, hey, are we within parameters here? Or for me in this case, it's like, this is a sensitive issue. I'm placing a certain amount of trust in you as legal professionals, as leadership. Like, this is my concern, which is why I sent it to them in the first place. And that email is what I ultimately got retaliated against for, was that email. Now, I kind of had the sense that, over the summer, there was kind of a sea change as well, because in the middle of the summer, we have these meetings, and they're kind of like threat review meetings. And it's where all the different programs get together, and you talk about your previous year, the cases that have been worked, and what you forecast or think the year is going to look like, in the future. You may have heard the term integrated program management. It's basically like a stat chart, where we track all the different cases we have, the different types of investigative techniques that are utilized, the different types of operations that are utilized throughout the year. There are problems with that, because that's a whole other, separate issue, which if we have time, I could talk about. But essentially at these meetings, what they're looking for is feedback from the different programs. They're looking for feedback from the gang squad folks. They're looking for feedback from the counter intel people, counterterrorism people. This is your time to kind of state your case, or what direction you think the program's going in, and that sort of thing. Well, the time came for me to speak at that meeting, which we didn't have in person, which was the first time we hadn't had that meeting in person. Several of the executives were having it upstairs, but the rest of us were doing it virtually. And when the time for me to speak came up, my microphone computer just shorted, cut out, whatever. And so I'm fumbling, at my workstation, trying to get my mic and my audio to work again, because I have something to contribute to the conversation. And by the time I, get it fixed and I'm able to speak again, they've already moved on to the next topic. Well, I thought it was important enough that I decided to interject, and I said, may I have permission to speak? And they said, sure, go ahead. And so I voiced my concerns again with what I thought was going on with that particular investigation. Normally, there's some kind of feedback, hey, expound upon what you're saying, X, Y, Z. And I got crickets back. And then my supervisor, who was at the actual physical meeting, was just kind of thank you for voicing your concerns, and we'll move on now. So there was usually at these meetings, there's a discussion that's generated and a back and forth, but it was just first my mic cut out, which I don't know what to attribute to that. And then when I finally get back on and I say my piece, there's no back and forth or feedback. It's crickets. And then they're like, thank you, and we'll be moving on now.
What did you say? What was important enough to say?
I pretty much just conveyed that I thought there was a very different story as to what was going on.
It was a verbal version of your email? It
was a verbal version of the email.
And they had already seen this email. They knew that that's what you were going to do, and they didn't want to hear it?
No, I would say at these meetings, they literally want you to speak up. They don't want you to sit there and just be like a fly on the wall.
So why would they have killed your microphone?
I have no idea.
Right. If that happened.
I just thought it was pretty interesting.
But once you did get to share, then they didn't have any response, because you were questioning the official narrative from the director, Ray.
Yep.
And so even if they hadn't seen your email previously,
right,
what you were saying was unkosher. So
right, and then there's other people from other programs there. Part of the program meeting is so that the other programs, because what happens is when investigations are big enough, you end up drawing in people who are working different issues to help with the investigation.
Right.
So you can end up drawing people in from gang squad or white collar squad or that sort of thing, just as a plus up on personnel to help out. So at these meetings, it's for the programs involved, but it's also for, the larger investigative body at the office to just have a general awareness of what's our office working on, what's Big Bureau working on, just so I have some kind of a gist or a situational awareness of what's going on.
So you got this big group meeting in our office. It's your time to share, and you speak up and you say something that nobody wants to comment on, because they don't want to agree with you. They don't want to be associated. Now you have said the emperor has no clothes or is not wearing a lot of clothes.
Right.
And so there's crickets and they're moving on. So
Right.
I can easily picture that awkward silence on a Zoom call with people, and the people probably in your office are a little embarrassed that you've caused this stink,
Right.
and embarrassing the Charlotte office around other offices, other personnel.
Right. Yeah. This one's internal, but like it's internal for like the whole like state. So it's like there's a Charlotte office. And if people don't know, usually when there's an FBI field office, they have satellite offices around the state.
Okay.
So for instance, you might have, I don't know, FBI Houston. Well, FBI Houston would naturally have satellite, offices called resident agencies that are a part of that field office. So just because, an office is called FBI Nashville or FBI Chicago, there's going to be satellite offices spread out across the territorial area with people. And so those satellite offices would have been on the call as well.
Okay. So after you make this statement in this virtual meeting, how are attitudes towards you after that? Is that when it really started degrading?
That's when I could kind of tell after that. It was kind of like a, parting of the seas where there were people who were supportive of me, but they weren't openly supportive of me. They were supportive of me in the hallways or in the coffee break room or in the stairwell or in the garage heading out of the building. Like, hey man, I agree with you. Like, thanks for speaking up. And then I would ask people like, well, why didn't you speak up? And they're like, well, I don't want to be the rusty nail that gets hammered down. So there were other people thinking the same thing I was, or the same sentiment, but the chilling effect from the deputy director and then even from our local chain of command was, you don't want to end up on duty on Thanksgiving or Christmas, so you just toe the line and go with what we're doing here. That really worked or was effective. I mean, directly after that call, I had a couple of colleagues who were like, hey, thanks for speaking up, man. And I was like, how come you didn't speak up?
Yeah.
I'm like the intel guy.
Did anybody in authority over you come to you and complain directly about what you said?
No.
Okay.
No.
It was just were they just like kind of walking past you in the hallway, like looking the other way?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then with my supervisor was my direct supervisor is kind of a Where's Waldo situation that multiple people knew about, because other supervisors or managers would come and ask us like, where is so-and-so at? And we're like, I don't know, haven't seen him, and that was a common occurrence to where we kind of, the intel component, because on paper we're a unit, but really we get dispersed out amongst the office and we're attached to different squads. So you may not see your supervisor all that much, but then ours was kind of like a Where's Waldo, where people would be actively looking for him and we'd have no idea where he was.
So you were never officially told to toe the line with the official narrative?
No.
Okay.
No, not until September 29th, that sit down.
Okay, is that the next logical thing to just talk about?
Yeah, that's the next logical thing.
Okay, take us there.
Yeah, so September 29th, that conversation.
Sorry, so when was this virtual meeting? In the summer?
That was in the summer. That
like
was
June,
in July.
Okay, July.
That was in July of 2021.
And fast forward 3 months.
And then
you're in
fast
September.
forward to the September 29th email.
Okay.
We have the discussion about it. Apparently the Chief Division Counsel was the one that was the most upset about it, which all the groups of attorneys that I've worked with over the past 4 years all scratched their heads like, why would your Chief Division Counsel have any issue with this, except for the fact that, according to colleagues of mine, agents, he was one of the chief ringleaders of keep your head down, stay off the radar, don't say anything. We don't want headquarters attention. And so that type of, now I know is a whistleblower disclosure that I was directly retaliated against, which is illegal, was probably what he was worried about. He didn't want undue attention towards the Charlotte field office.
I didn't have the timeline right before. So this meeting happened before your email. So first it was the
July meeting.
The July meeting, and that's the first time you could have made any kind of public statement about this issue.
Right.
Of there being an official narrative not necessarily matching up with the facts on the ground.
Right.
And then 3 months later, you send this email. Okay, so I got the timeline right now. It was just mixed up in my head.
Yeah.
So now it's September. You send this email. Keep going.
Yep. So we have that meeting. After I send the email, I state, my concerns and that sort of thing. And at the meeting, the ASAC essentially says, okay, I understand your stance. This is your analytical opinion or point of view. I think we're going to be fine here. Thank you for the explanation. That's it. And then my supervisor essentially relayed to me, I didn't know what this meeting was about until it literally occurred real time. And so he just said, I think you're right up to the line. He's like, I don't think you're over the line. He's like, I just think you're right up to the line. Just be careful. And
What's that mean?
I have no idea what that means. It's like what I said is either valid or it's invalid. I don't understand. I think for him, the fact that the ASAT came down and the Chief Division Counsel got all flustered about it and it caused him to have an issue is what he was more concerned about than necessarily any kind of legal line being crossed over. It was, they don't like hearing this, like try not to have anything like this happen again. And that was the first real meeting where it was kind of like, we don't really need to hear any more information like this again. And that was pretty much the last time that I sent anything of that nature to anybody except for a colleague that I was working with on the squad who was still interested in like, what's really going on here? What's the real narrative of what happened here? How come the agency is being squirrely about this and going about this completely differently than anything that we've done in the past 2 years? And that was the only other person I ever talked to about alternate narrative, what's going on, at least, email transactionally, like after that. And that was the end of it. And then the COVID-19 mandate kicked in November of 2021, which I think that was also an irritant for them. Found out after the fact through releases to my attorneys that me not going along with the COVID-19 mandate was an issue for them as well.
Not getting the shot?
Not getting the shots. And then, not inputting my medical information into a database that the organization had sent out. They'd created an internal database, I think that's been released publicly now, called My MedLink, where they wanted you to put in like medical data into the database, with your personal identifiers.
Yeah.
And then if you'd taken the shots and who gave you the shots and that sort of thing. And I'm like, I'm not going along with that. And then not an attorney, but I looked at the fine print information that they had on the front end of it, and it just looked really fishy to me, the information. It was like, you want me to participate in this program, but you're giving it the guise like I have to participate or there's going to be consequences for me. But the language you have here in the front is saying I'm doing this completely voluntarily and I'm surrendering my control over the information that I put into this medical database. And I was just like, this doesn't look right. And again, there were several colleagues had a similar stance, and they eventually caved because the head shed at the Charlotte field office essentially put out the message that there's going to be problems for you if you don't participate in this database. And I remember some of the agents saying, well, I don't want to have duty on Thanksgiving or Christmas, so that's it. I don't want to get put on the naughty list. And then, rumor intelligence started spreading that they were keeping lists, in the head shed office of who was going along with the COVID-19 program and who wasn't complying. And so once that rumor got out there that they were keeping lists of who was getting the shots and who was complying with the program and that sort of thing, a bunch of people who had otherwise kind of stood firm and weren't going to do it, they just kind of caved and went out and do it. They're like, I'm just going to do the stupid shot, whatever. Right. I don't care. I'm just going to put my information in the database because I don't want to get on the crap list and end up on, surveillance on the west side of Charlotte at 2 a.m. Yeah. And so it's a bit of, you could allege coercion or pressure, negative pressure to get people to comply with something that they otherwise would not have complied with. Yeah.
So are we at the point in the story where your time with the Bureau comes to an end?
Yep. It's rapidly coming to an end because the mandate, there was an email that came out where if you hadn't have complied with the mandate by a certain date, you were not welcome any longer in Bureau space. And that was around, I want to say November 19th or 21st of 2021. Just before Thanksgiving, so it was Thanksgiving week. And so that was my official last day in official Bureau space doing anything for the Bureau was right before Thanksgiving of 2021, and I wasn't complying with the mandate, and I didn't think that the surrendering the medical information in the MyMed link was legit or just either. I thought it all, coming from the military, I could go in so many directions here. Like my mindset, I'm always thinking of like war or strategy. So I'm looking at everything in retrospect, in combination. I'm looking at all the issues around the 2020 election, how it doesn't look legit, but the cases aren't getting granted standing. I'm looking at the January 6th event, and I'm like, this looks like a Reichstag fire type event. I'm remembering the bombing event that happened in Nashville of around Christmas Day of 2020, where there were voting machines that were supposed to be in there getting examined that were destroyed by this bombing event. The January 6th event, which looks like a Reichstag fire political change type event, the reverse in approach of don't do anything to our leftist mobs, but we're going to chase down grandma and grandpa on the right. And then the reaction to me for speech, an intelligence analyst literally providing an opinion, which is what I'm literally paid to do, getting ostracized and looked at cross-eyed by management who's getting pressured by higher headquarters management, the director's office and the deputy director. I mean, these are like from a military, analyst war. I'm like, this looks like an operational plan that's occurring here. And then there's other little things that I'm aware of too. So when January 6th happened, usually the Bureau is there's two events where this happened. The bombing event, I believe it was in Nashville, where the voting machines were destroyed. The Bureau was on the scene pretty quick with a press conference, because I remember it was Christmas Day, and I was like, and I even remember talking to other agents at the office like a couple of days later, like, weren't you impressed by how fast the Bureau moved on that? We're like, the Bureau never moves that fast. Like, that was incredible how fast they were there and were able to set up a press conference right after the event. That was impressive. And then the other thing that stuck in my mind was on January 6th was how fast we were starting to get some emails from headquarters and I believe DTOS or other domestic terrorism sections from DC on how to, like, basically giving guidance and then providing like intel type documents on different groups, like post January 6th. Like, those documents started coming out quick. And the natural thing that just struck a chord in my head was, from the military, we always have like war games, or exercises, they call them, where you basically go through these exercise scenarios of, it could be war with a nation, it could be different contingencies, like this is what we're going to do at different parts of the contingency. Well, usually the scenario writers, they have injects. So like, it'll be emails or it'll be printouts that they have where they're giving to the people who are participating in the scenario, essentially information to, continue the exercise for training purposes. For whatever reason, on January 6th, when the email started coming out, it just, in my head, it felt like an exercise. And I had done some exercises with the Bureau before as well, to where it was like, this feels like something that was in the can, planned, and now this is the part where they're putting in the scenario injects to give to the field offices, like, these are the printouts that we want you to read for our scenario. The idea being, we want you to come to the conclusions that we want you to come to. So that's something that's like a hunch or a sense, but I've pretty much had that sense with both of those events, like things that just came out of like left field, where I was like, that seems atypical or out of the norm. The Bureau reacted really fast to that Nashville bombing. And then there was a copycat incident not long after that. And then on January 6th, I had this sense of, this feels like we're getting fed scenario injects to a certain extent. And so those are just things that, over time and experience, you get a sense for. It's kind of like a cop has a hunch on something, but you can't necessarily take a hunch to a courtroom or anything. It's just something you kind of naturally develop over time, or a sense you get for something. And so you have that. And then part of that is the COVID-19 the mandate and the shots and that sort of thing. And I conveyed to my chain of command before my honest opinion, like more than once, that I thought potentially it was a biological weapon that was being pushed out on the populace and the world with a highly effective psychological operation, psychological warfare going on. I conveyed that to them, like that wasn't a secret. Now, they acted shocked when they found out I wasn't complying with the mandate, Thanksgiving week. My opinion, I think, is because so many people are so attached to mammon and money and pensions and that sort of thing. They're thinking, I don't think they hadn't really come across too many people that would operate on principle. And so I think it was shocking for them, especially somebody who'd been the employee of the year, highly respected employee, very effective at the job, that somebody would make a decision that wouldn't be money centric. That's my opinion, because it seemed like they were shocked that I wasn't going along with the mandate. And I pretty much conveyed to them, I'm willing to suffer whatever the consequences are of not going along with this, because this is wrong.
So is that the stated reason for your termination, of that you didn't comply with the mandate?
Yeah, the original beef that started, and this is what a lot of people don't know. People kind of know me for my testimony from May of 2023, testimony from September of 2024, where I got emotional and gave the warning. But people don't know is that my actual conflict with the Bureau started over the COVID-19 mandate.
I didn't know that.
And that's what the initial back and forth was with them, was over the mandate. And other interesting things I found out from other whistleblowers is almost to a T, I don't want to say 100%, but the overwhelming majority are either military veterans or law enforcement, prior law enforcement before they joined the Bureau. And almost none of them went along with the COVID-19 program. Mm-hmm. That's like the one common denominator, or a couple of common denominators amongst us all, was apprehension around the COVID-19 program, or just didn't do the shots at all. And we're all military veterans. And then a good chunk of us are either Catholic or some other Christian denomination. Those are the commonalities between those of us who've been named, and then also there are a bunch who are unnamed, who are also still trying to fight for justice behind the scenes as well.
So your employment ends, and then...
Actually, it doesn't end. I'm suspended.
Okay.
I'm put into this indefinite suspended, limbo. Mm-hmm. So there's a back and forth I have with the Bureau through Thanksgiving and through the month of December over the COVID-19 mandate, where they essentially want me to state my reasons why I'm not going along with it. And then they're going to give me essentially their analysis or their opinion based on what I've given them. So I give them several pages explaining all my reasons why I'm not going along with the program and what my thoughts are about it. And I'm anticipating the discussion to continue. So I get a call from my supervisor to set up an off-site meeting. So I'm like, okay. So we set up the offsite meeting. It's just going to be at the Cracker Barrel over at Carowinds, which became kind of a joke between my initial counsel, the infamous Cracker Barrel meeting, So if you want to go see where a whistleblower got canceled in the Charlotte area, go have a meal at the Cracker Barrel across from Carowinds. Yeah. A little bit of, local governmental history.
I've been there many times.
So, So I show up, and my direct supervisor doesn't even show up to the meeting. So he's the one that called me to set up the meeting, but he doesn't even show up to the meeting. It's the chief security officer and then an assistant special agent in charge from the field office who show up in the parking lot. And they essentially read off the suspension letter. And I'm thinking I'm going there, they're going to come up with some kind of workaround for me around the COVID-19 mandate. Hey, we can't have you come into the building anymore, but we can have you work on this stuff remote, or we can put you at this offsite helping, this unit, blah, blah, blah. No, they proceed to read off this suspension letter saying that I'm being suspended for conspiratorial views in regards to the events of January 6, 2021.
Oh, okay.
That's the official suspension letter I get, says I'm being suspended for conspiratorial views in regards to the events of January 6, 2021, and they question my allegiance to the United States of America. And then...
Okay. So it wasn't COVID vaccine. It's the conspiratorial views of January 6th.
Right.
And questioning your allegiance to America. So, okay. So we are right that you were suspended or fired, but suspended due to the January 6th issue.
Right.
It wasn't the mandate.
Right.
Okay. Because for the last 10 minutes, I've been like, I didn't know you were suspended over the vaccine.
I wasn't, but the initial conflict that got
you.
me out of the workspace was the COVID-19
That was just
mandate.
a good straw man to get you out, and then they figured out what to do with you, and that's when they came down with this suspension letter, and they gave the real reasons.
Right. Either that, or they didn't want to rebut what I'd written in my response to the COVID-19 mandate, because I never got an official response, and I had to coordinate with another unit from headquarters in regards to what I thought. So to this day, they never directly responded to what I claimed in that letter. And they just went at me on this conspiratorial views in regards to January 6th. Okay. So to me, I just kind of hit on that because a bunch of the other whistleblowers, they've all been canceled for various reasons. But the commonality amongst us all is we all either didn't do the COVID-19 shots or we had some pushback over the COVID-19 shots.
It's a common thread running
through.
through.
So that's the common thread through all the whistleblowers is the COVID-19 mandate. So to me as an intel guy, that's like a red alert, what did you guys do here? And what is the American government doing now? And to the plot thickens, I did an interview last year after the September 2024 testimony with a voter advocacy group, Catholics for Catholics, with their CEO, John Yep. That interview got taken down. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what we'd talked about in that entire interview that had gotten taken down. Well, it was such an issue that my counsel, Empower Oversight, they reached out to the Weaponization Committee again and said, hey, you guys need to reach out to YouTube. Because it just got taken down hard. Yeah. Reach out to YouTube and figure this out. And what the issue was around, now mind you, on paper, they canceled me behind January 6th, 2021 conspiratorial views. But the YouTube video got taken down because Sundar Pichai from YouTube had to respond to the Weaponization Committee. And then the video popped back up several days later. But they very much took it down, and then it popped back up. And the issue was my statements in regards to COVID-19. So as an intel guy, former Marine intelligence all-source analyst, that's the gold. And that's the gold that the American people still haven't gotten the answer on. And that's the thing that divided our country, right? And then obviously, this is Tan Books. This is a spiritual thing. Who likes to divide? Who likes to confuse? Who likes to cause animosity and war? So for me...
It's the father of lies.
Right. So for me, the unanswered thing in this whole thing is what really went down with COVID-19. And I've already expressed here, my opinion was it was a bioweapon. It was for population reduction. And they used a highly effective psychological operation. One of the most effective psychological operations probably since the Garden of Eden to, take down the human family. And that's my stance. So...
Great, Kevin. Is this gonna?
But I'm telling you,
is this gonna serve?
You have to help us talk to Sundar Pichai again to get this one reinstated.
Yeah. Which will happen, but they may not want the blowback because the Weaponization Committee responded very quick. I was like, a voter advocacy group with a guy talking about his faith and how it propelled him through an entire fight, and it gets taken down. And people on X were like, why'd the interview get taken down? But the thing is they cut off the initial viewership. Yeah. And so by the time it popped back up, the interest was they nuked the interest in it.
Well, we hope people are able to see this video.
So sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
I didn't know it was going that way. Did you, Kevin? I didn't know.
Nope, and we're on it. Event 201. I guess you're probably familiar with that before COVID rolled out, right? Was that part of what formed your opinion on
No. It just seemed like this whole thing seems like a large-scale operation with multiple parts of the operation that have been played out. And
I can't believe we ended up here.
And I think it's still ongoing.
Wow.
You know, and I don't know. And the best thing I can tell people is to believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that's what's going to save you in the end. And I guess for me as an intelligence professional, that's what it got to the point of, is this is a real battle between good and evil. And for people who don't have that kind of background, they're not going to be able to see this thing for what it is clearly. But that's where we're going. And like, we're eternal beings. And you're either going to spend eternity with, you know, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, the Ancient of Days, or you're going to be quite literally burning in hell forever. And so for us, as people of faith, the disciples of Jesus Christ, convicted by God to go forth and make disciples of all nations, that's our task, is how can we effectively get that message out to people, even people who don't want to hear it. Now, our task is to make sure that they hear the message. It's not on us if they're going to digest it or not. That's between them and the Holy Spirit, God. It's like, you know, St. Paul, you know, shake the dust off your feet, just pass the message. Try to be a good and effective messenger. Don't browbeat people, but try to get the message to as many people as possible. So for me, what I believe from God is my mission is basically to tell people to get right with God and to just do that in baby steps. You know, you can't, you know, our pastor always says you can't give a baby a pork chop, you know, straight away. You got to give them like little tidbits to eat. So I would just tell them, start at the Gospel of Mark. It's the shortest one. It's 16 chapters. It's very earthy, and just go one chapter a day and read that, and then just start praying a prayer known as the Our Father, and then just do that every day consistently, and then wait for God to convict you. And then if you have any, you know, good, obviously, I would advocate for Roman Catholic friends, start talking to them and chewing their ear off about what is this faith? What is this real presence? What's the Mass all about? What's your faith all about? And then just start from there. But I think that's the real mission. I think my story is a story of warning, of you need to get your act together. You need to pay attention to what your government's doing, but you also need to get your spiritual act together. So as a real marriage, you know, we have a corpus, you know, we're supernatural beings, but we have flesh. So get both houses in order. Get your spiritual house in order and get your natural house in order as best you can, but not putting all your faith in what you can physically do. The fight's already been won by Jesus. You just have to have faith in him and listen to his commands and do his will. Do the will of God to the best of your ability. St. Alphonsus Liguori, Uniformity with God's Will.
Yeah.
Short little pamphlet. Read that baby, keep it on your nightstand, and do your best to try to imitate that.
I have many other questions.
Yep.
Maybe we're halfway done. I got a lot more.
Yep.
But let's take a quick bio break.
Yep.
And we'll be back soon.
Yep. Awesome.
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
All right, we're back after the bio break. That was a fascinating segment. But let's lead to after your termination and the stated reason. By the way, I was thinking this, Marcus. If I'm standing in the parking lot at Cracker Barrel and I had been terminated initially because I refused to, or suspended initially because I refused to get the vax, and then the stated reason in the paper, which could be a cover, that because I had conspiratorial theories, I'm like, okay, I get that. But then one of the reasons was they questioned your allegiance to the United States. That is the thing that would have pissed me off. And I suspect as a veteran, as a long-term contractor with government agencies, your wife, 20-year veteran with the Bureau, her father, like as we talked about earlier, questioning a man's allegiance to the United States, that's a deep, deep insult.
Right. Yeah. So I would say it was kind of shocking, but not totally, because I had gotten a signal grace probably within 24 hours of that. Providentially, like God has given me a lot of grace, a lot of signal graces throughout the way when something is going to happen. So when that happened, I wasn't necessarily expecting it, but I had just had a conversation the day before with my wife about something didn't seem right, and I didn't know if we had witnessed for the faith enough or anything of that nature. And then when this happened in the parking lot, I just kind of stood my ground because I knew the allegations were false. And then at that point, it kind of sealed it for me that I was up against something truly wicked and truly evil. And then the other interesting, thing I thought about as it was going on was the assistant special agent in charge that was literally reading off. Like I was friends or friendly with a bunch of these people. So the assistant special agent in charge that read off the suspension letter was almost rolling his eyes himself, as I think it was a form letter from Security Division or something of that nature. And he's literally the guy that wrote up my certificate for FBI Charlotte Employee of the Year from 2019. Of course, right?
Yeah.
Of course. So you just kind of laugh at how the evil one works. I'm like, the guy who wrote you up for an award in 2019 is the one who's questioning your allegiance to the United States of America, when it was literally your allegiance to the United States of America that led you to take a stand.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I just kind of thought they were fools or buffoons. And it didn't bother me too bad because I had this conviction that you're fighting against evil, and evil's going to lob all sorts of lies and false allegations against you. And so for me, spiritually, in my spiritual life or relationship with God, I'd gotten to the point where it was like any kind of suffering or hardship that got heaped on top of me, I knew from reading about the saints, I knew in a way it was a gift from God. I think it was Saint Therese of Lisieux that said, if God puts crosses in your path, pick them up. It's your means of salvation. And so for me, when that happened, it kind of sucked, but at the same time, I had consolation because I knew this was a pretty significant cross and this was pretty wicked. At that point, I was solidified with that reading of the letter that this was something truly malevolent that I was up against, along with my wife and kids too.
Let me tell you how I perceive you a little bit before we go on more questions about the FBI. But let me tell you how I see you a little bit. The few times we've talked, I think many good people have a sense of God's providence and how God has worked in their life when they are looking back at it. The challenge for most of us, including myself, is awareness how God is working in your life in the moment. Because most of us just say, this sucks, this is unfair, it's unjust, this is evil. And only later do we look back on it and say, that was the hand of God. He placed me there for a reason. This was not just a burden, it was a blessing. You, my friend, seem like somebody who's aware of it in the present moment. And that's a rare man.
I think that's a gift from God. You just have to be grateful for whatever gifts God gives you. And I just think, it's interesting you brought that up because it jogs a memory. I had a dream, God dreams, visions, but also natural occurrences.
In almost every book of the Bible, he talks about dreams.
Dreams and visions, right? And then also natural occurrences that happen as well. I had a dream several years ago, and in the dream, I'd been away, not really practicing the faith a lot, and then my fervor increased over the years. And it was about the midway point where my fervor increased quite a bit. And I had a pretty powerful dream, like I was at the foot of the cross of Christ at Calvary, but everything was black, so I couldn't see. And I think I remember something in the fact it's like, you can't look at God. If you looked at God, you would die, before you're purified. And so I very much had the sense that I was at Calvary at the foot of the cross, and I was kneeling and I had my eyes closed, and I could feel in the dream Jesus hop off the cross and walk towards me. And I knew to keep my eyes closed because I was like, I'm not crazy enough to look at God, like I'm going to die. And he walked up to me and he made the sign of the cross over my eyes. And he said, eyes that see. And then over my ears, he made the sign of the cross and said, ears that hear. And then I woke up after that. And so I've always kind of thought back to that as maybe a spiritual gift in some sense of, like you said, being able to see God in the moment. But I tried to stay, if you've ever seen, pop culture reference, the movie The Avengers with the Hulk, and they're trying to figure out how are you able to control it? You used to be out of control when you would turn into the Hulk. Now it seems like you can turn it off and on. And he said, I just stay angry, and that way I can control it and turn it off and on. So what I try to do spiritually to the best of my ability is to try to stay at least mentally or contemplatively in the presence of God to the best of my ability. And I think in some way, shape, form, or fashion, or just a direct grace, I'm able to try to peel out what's, as far as uniformity with God's will, what's the best thing I can do at this moment? Or what's the most righteous thing I can do at this moment? And I fail a lot. But I think just maintaining that kind of a mindset or approach, or what's the most godlike thing I can do at this particular moment, regardless of my fallen human nature, that's what I need to try with all my might to do. And I need to try to peel out what God's teaching me at each moment, either contemplatively walking around my house or neighborhood, or my interactions with my wife or kids, or even my interactions with other human beings. Is it's like we're all supposed to be in relationship with God. We're all from God. We're a big family. What's this human being need from me? Or what am I supposed to do for this human? And what's this human doing for me? And what's God doing to both of us at the same time? And so I think if you can try to the best of your ability to just stay contemplatively, like God's everywhere, like God's and he has an angel, you have an angel. So you have these angelic beings, in the creed it says visible and invisible. That means they're all around you. I remember something from Padre Pio, somebody asked him one time, he said something to the effect, if God allowed us to see the fallen angels, they would blot out the sun. So I always think about that in terms of spiritual warfare, of your guardian angels near you, but then when you're out amongst other people, their guardian angels are there too. And so we're just this big family trying to get united back with God. And how can we help one another do that? But there's also an enemy that's always lurking about, and they're literally all around you, trying to cause you to sin or misstep or lead other people to sin. So you have to be cognizant of that to the best of your ability. And you have to be productive, especially as husbands and fathers. You can't just lose yourself in contemplation. I'd spoken to a friend, if I could just sit on my back porch all day, reading the Bible or other holy books and maybe the occasional sip of bourbon and then just staring at the Blue Jays or the Bluebirds or the Cardinals, I'd do that. But I have a wife and kids I have to take care of. So I can't just totally detach and just go off into the forest or the woods and
maybe we could do that together sometimes.
Put on a brown sack and just,
You can have the bourbon, I'll take a cigar, and we'll be good.
Yeah. So that's where I try to stay at through everything. And I know we're supernatural and natural beings. And so while we're here, we have to do the best we can to do God's will and to be a light to other people and to try to lead them to the light. So I think that's just a gift from God that I have that hopefully I'm not wasting or using poorly.
That's beautiful. Going back to that parking lot meeting in Cracker Barrel, what do you think, did they explain, or what do you think the underpinning was to questioning your allegiance to America? Now, the reason I'm asking this, do you think that was related to you questioning the narrative of the director? Because again, the conspiracy, buying into conspiratorial theories about the January 6th, that they were clear on that.
Right.
And I can see how they got there.
Right.
And it's a conjunction, right? And questioning your allegiance to America.
Right.
Are they saying that having a conspiratorial view of January 6th is lacking allegiance to America, or was that allegiance to America issue in regards to the COVID program?
What I took from it was the quote-unquote conspiratorial views in regards to January 6th indicated a lack of allegiance to the United States of America. Like almost like how the sense I got of it was, how dare you stray away from the official narrative?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like even if you have a conspiratorial view about
Right.
January 6th,
Right.
I mean, even if your view was aliens are behind January 6th,
Correct.
that doesn't mean you lack allegiance to the America.
Right. But that's what they had to put in there, I think, for investigatively, I think for the paper to make the paper didn't make any sense. But
Right.
I think they had to put that in there.
Because it's treason talk.
Because to me, that indicates from working there, and there, not to go into too many details, but there are surveillance methods that my wife and I are aware of that they utilize that are highly illegal, which we're still waiting to see if those are going to get aired out at all under the current administration. So I'll tell you, when it says allegiance to the United States of America, the thought that pops into my head are those types of words can sometimes be used in counterintelligence investigations. And with a counterintelligence investigation, that opens up the gamut to what kind of surveillance tools they can use against you, which at that point, it goes into a almost no holds barred approach to invading your privacy in every way, shape, form, or fashion. So there were egregious crimes conducted by government actors in my case, which still haven't been rectified, which we're still waiting to see if there's going to be any actual justice, which is, my hang up with the FBI is it's like, these weren't boo-boos or mistakes or, our bad, let's let bygones be bygones. Like, these people conducted like high crimes against
what they do
with like the surveillance, like the invasion of my privacy and my family's privacy.
Like what? Like,
I mean,
checking your emails, like bugging your phones. What do you like? Can you give examples?
Things, there are things I know they did specifically that I don't want to say, live on camera. But yeah, like pretty much any and everything that opens up a whole toolbox of what you can use to investigate somebody, and just the invasion of privacy under false allegations.
Interesting. Okay.
Is just, to me, there's just a level of malevolence there, which some of the people there, they might be so clouded over, they're not even malevolence or wickedness doesn't even cross their mind. It's so commonplace for them.
But by the reason they had to put that language of questioning your allegiance to America is that would justify perhaps stretching the law.
Right.
But it somehow probably invokes certain provisions of the Patriot Act that allow them to bug you
Any
and surveillance
kind of electronic
you.
surveillance or surveillance in your neighborhood, or various tactics, techniques, procedures, and devices.
And if they were, and which they could probably on the law find some way to do that with suspected terrorists.
Right. They have a lot of wriggle room with their wordplay on the documents and whatnot. Get it. So that's why they put that in there. And you're right, it is insulting, but I'm like, as I explained before, when you're up against wickedness, they're going to put whatever they need to put on the paper to affect the outcome they wanted, which in my case was they wanted me to quit. So I was essentially indefinitely suspended. So I was never terminated. So what they did was they put me in this indefinite administrative limbo.
So you have to quit to go get another job, basically, right?
Right, exactly, which I wasn't going to do because I wasn't going to validate their statements, and I wasn't going to let them off the hook for, what I said about January 6th or the stance on the COVID-19 mandate.
All right. So after Cracker Barrel parking lot, what do you do? What happens then?
After that, I go home. I tell my wife what's going on. She kind of laughs because we had just had the conversation the day before. And she's like, of course, this would be the next logical step. And, she was furious. She's probably been more furious throughout this entire process than I have. I'm angry, but I'm not going to try to the best of my ability not to let any other creature get, disturb my peace or anything like that. But I know we're in for a fight. And so we lawyer up a group called Bigley Ranish, who they've since retired, but they did a fine job. They're federal security clearance attorneys, and they did a very fine job. And they took my case initially. They said, we only help folks out in your situation after your clearance has been terminated, but your situation is so unique. Like, we've never seen anything like this on paper before. They even told me that they'd bounced it around their firm, and they were pretty convinced that no attorney had generated that document. They're like, no self-respecting attorney would have generated a document like this. This had to have been a security official or something of that nature. And they were kind of shocked that they let that kind of letter outside the walls of the organization with the official letterhead of the organization on it. They were just like stupefied. And so I think just because of the uniqueness of my case, they said, normally we don't represent folks until after their clearance has been terminated, but in your case, we're going to go ahead and represent you because it looks like they're just going to try to bleed you out. They're just going to try to bleed you out financially. And they're just going to use the process as the punishment. But we have to see how this plays out first. And so essentially that's what happened was the attorneys, they sent letter after letter, weren't getting any response from the Bureau. They were initially able to get me a little bit of pay because I was a veteran. So my initial suspension letter was dated January of 2022. But because they had found this stipulation for veterans, they had to pay me for 30 days. So what happened was the Bureau had initially cut off my pay in December based on the initial conflict over the COVID-19 mandate. So they put me into this AWOL status and cut off my pay in December of 2021. So I didn't get paid for December 2021 or January 2022. But the guys at Bigley Ranish, they'd found this stipulation that veterans have to be paid for at least 30 days before they're suspended. So what happened was my pay got turned back on for the month of February of 2022. And then I got turned back off again in March of 2022. And they issued a new suspension letter in March of 2022. So the original suspension letter was dated January of 2022. And then the new suspension letter got dated March of 2022.
Was it the same terminology, or they changed the rationale?
It was pretty much the same terminology in that one as the first one. Okay. And then after that, the attorneys didn't get any feedback from the Bureau. We were just getting ghosted. It was at that point that we decided to approach the Weaponization Committee, in council with me. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. And then it was in May, I believe it was the first week of May 2022, Congressman Jordan had gone on a press conference on the media and announced retaliation against conservative employees at the FBI. And, comically enough, my attorneys got a phone call from the Bureau literally within hours after that press conference that Congressman Jordan had, announcing that the FBI was essentially doing a purge of conservative employees from the Bureau ranks. My guys laughed. They're like, these guys are so transparent. And it became evident throughout the course of time as the case progressed that the only time we got any real movement from the FBI was if bad press got generated on them. So if there was no bad press generated on them, like there was almost no movement in my situation. It became an inside joke where it's just like, well, we don't want to have to litigate this thing in the press, but if that's what we have to do, then that's what we're going to do. And so almost like clockwork, anytime my situation or another whistleblower situation generated bad press for the Bureau, because it just on its face looked horrible, then they would get some kind of a correspondence back from either the Bureau or DOJ in regards to our case. And so that kind of got things going a little bit, but then they still somewhat, I had to go do an interview with Security Division, not long. This is May of 2022. Yeah. Within weeks of that, I had to go do an interview with them and the investigators themselves, who I think were contract investigators for the Bureau, which I think is a somewhat commonplace practice for that Security Division, where they get retired agents or other retired investigators to come in for these security clearance cases. They seem flummoxed, so they were the ones, who came with like the cartoonish level, manila file, intimidation tactic, like these are all the files we have on you. In my head, I'm thinking, I worked there. Like, I know your gimmicks. I know the game. And it was just interesting because we got halfway through and I could tell with the investigators themselves that they were a bit flummoxed, just from looking at their, body language and whatnot as to why we were even there, and they took a break and they came back and it was like, they went at me and I could tell they were just trying to find anything. And it was like nothing, and I could just see in their eyes, like they were bewildered. And I joked with my attorney afterwards. I'm like, yeah, somebody just told them, here's a hot potato. They had no idea it was a hot potato. And now they're the ones on the hook as the interviewers for this thing, which if it blows up, their names are going to be associated with this thing, which one of them, made the point to tell me that they were an Irish Catholic, but they put their faith on the shelf before they came into work, which I don't know where that came from other than they probably did interviews. Like, the guy's very Catholic. He has a Dewey Reams Bible on his desk at work, like he has a St. Benedict's medal, like, woo. As I'm like, where's this coming from? That this is even interjected into the conversation of almost this sense of like, what are you doing bringing your faith to work type thing. And it was almost like him saying that he was Irish Catholic was like this validation, like, oh, I'm Irish Catholic. And, and I put my faith on the shelf before I show up. And I'm like, well, it sucks for you, dude.
Yeah.
Like, hope it works out well. It's your initial judgment. Oh my gosh. Not me, buddy. So yeah, it was just really bizarre. And I could kind of tell at the end, and I got a rise out of them at the end to where that's what I said at the testimony in May of 2023 in my initial statement. They out loud stated, don't sue us. Like, I'm like, are you sure about that? Oh, so it's like the cat's out of the bag now. It's like the game's up. It's like, this is totally unjust. You've just pissed off a Marine. You've told me to fight. You've brought me to war, and you think I'm going to cake out of this thing. And I'm like animated by the Almighty God. It's on, dude. Like, it's on. Like, so maybe that's why the radical, traditionalist Catholic memo came out, because it's like, these people are going to fight evil tooth and nail. And that's what I would say to, not just your Catholic audience, your Catholic audience. Take your faith seriously, and you need to be willing to fight tooth and nail for it. Your king came down, took on flesh, and was nailed to a cross and died so that you would have eternal salvation. And if you don't have the courage to proclaim Christ in the public square, then he's going to deny you on the last day. You don't deny him, before man. He's going to deny you before the Father on the last day. So you proclaim Christ with everything that you do every day. You don't have to browbeat people, but your faith needs to be pretty evident to the people that you come into contact with. That's for the Catholics, the Christians, and I'd invite everybody just to go to adoration at your local Catholic church. Just try it one time. Just go there 10, 15 minutes and see if the Holy Spirit of God convicts you. And I promise you, he likely will. So, sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but it's just like,
yeah,
I just get fired up, man.
That's great.
Hey, Marcus, were you suggesting that the, I think it was the Virginia field office, some Virginia field office that said that...
Richmond office.
Richmond, yeah, thank you.
Yep.
The Traditional Catholics Domestic Terrorism, Association might have been in response to you and other Catholics doing what you did.
Right,
wow.
Correct. Yeah, I
Thank
do.
you,
I do believe that. Because I do believe to a certain extent that my MedLink database, there were just thoughts coming through my head. I'm like, if this is some kind of communist or globalist takeover, then I'm naturally going to want to know within the security organizations that I'm going to take over who's not going to toe the line and just follow orders. And so you're naturally going to want to get those people out of the ranks. So like the COVID-19 thing is a way to flush people out of the ranks. Apprehension about heavy-handed tactics around the January 6th cases. There are other whistleblowers, Mr. Friend and Mr. O'Boyle at those the testimony in May of 2023 attested to that, the heavy-handed tactics on some of the raids and whatnot that were unwarranted, investigations where people would have happily come into the office with their attorneys, but raids are happening anyway to drive up stats or, I could argue to instill fear into the populace. A security organization instilling fear into the populace. I mean, that's like an argument for terroristic type activity. That's one of the things, is to achieve political change through instilling fear in a populace. So that's not a good practice at all. So yeah, I would definitely say they started probably looking at people of faith within the ranks as people of principle, as folks who are not just going to toe the line and just follow orders, which is ironic. I didn't go through it, but for the FBI agents and I believe the intelligence analysts, so the people with the official title of intelligence analysts, they send them through the Holocaust Museum up in Washington, D.C. And the idea is to not just be a sentinel who just follows orders. When you see injustice or evil going on, you at least speak up or stand up and speak out against it. And they send agents through that, and they send intelligence analysts through that. And like the silence has been deafening from that organization. I mean, the fact that you can name, the public FBI whistleblowers on essentially one hand, and there are others who are unnamed, but the fact that it's not that many, it's not a very large group of folks, that's a tell for the American people.
Broad question, because I have so many detailed questions about the FBI and the systematic corruption and culture there, but I guess I'll just ask like this. What the hell happened? I mean, wasn't the FBI like a hotbed for good, solid Catholics historically? Like how did we get to where we are? And can you explain, what is this corruption? What is this systematic corruption going on in the FBI that's leading to all of weeding out traditional Catholics, weeding out people that have a conscience? What is going on?
I think what it is it's a sea change that's occurred over time. But I mean, there's always been some level of corruption within the Bureau. And, speaking with my wife about it, as we talked about earlier, she was an FBI brat, and then she worked for the FBI for 20 years. Her dad was an agent for 26 years. I think there's just a sea change, because the joke used to be in the FBI that the majority of FBI people were like Mormons or Catholics, back in the day.
Yeah.
And that's what you expected it to be. And what I've heard from people is essentially after 9/11 and the introduction of the Patriot Act, and then when they reformed the Bureau, post 9/11, they kind of gave it this more intel-centric focus. The Bureau's always done intelligence-related matters, but with, I guess, the change with the war on terrorism, quote-unquote war on terrorism, which is, that's a whole nother subject. That's a whole nother subject. There was just a sea change where you could really start to see a difference between like the older agents and the agents that were coming in like post 9/11. And there was a lack of principle. And from my personal experience, the thing that advances like a train in front of a lot of FBI people is their ego, just hubris. Even when I worked for TSA Office of Intelligence, we'd have phone calls sometimes, and there would just kind of be this condescending disdain that you could sense coming through the phone of like, why are you encountering my subject? What are you doing? Yada, yada, yada. And then I experienced, so that was like a one-off. And then I experienced that again when I started to work for the Bureau at the Terrorism Review and Examination Unit. We'd get crazy calls, from agents, almost talking down to you like you were a serf or a slave or something. And I remember one time just telling like, hey, dude, like, chill out. Like, you're not the only person who's been shot at for this country. And as soon as they found out, like, I was a Marine veteran and that sort of thing, it was like the tone of the conversation changed up a whole lot. But then I thought to myself, like, why does your tone change because I told you I'm a Marine veteran? Like, you shouldn't be talking to anybody like that. So there's a certain level of like arrogance, I would say. If I had to give you one trait that's like the most dominant trait I noticed in the FBI, is its arrogance. And then especially for me, being an intel guy, it's almost like, how dare you like give a different opinion or different story than what we're going for. So I would just say, for whatever reason, there's this arrogance that's just kind of crept in. And then it's easy money for a lot of people too. There's a lot of folks, they're not in any real danger. I mean, the people who are probably in the most danger in the Bureau are the folks that work on, gang squads, transnational organized crime and that sort of thing. They're the only ones, in my opinion. I mean, there are squads of people who may not ever pull their gun out, or their gun's got dust on it. It might jam on them at the next time they got to go qualify. So I think a lot of people, I think they refer to it as like the golden handcuffs, to where it's like, it's easy money. They're making a 6-figure salary. They don't want to upset the apple cart. Mom and babies are happy. I'm not going to do anything to upset this easy money train that's coming in. And so it's attachment.
How much of this is strategic corruption from the top of the FBI versus just complacency or inertia within the ranks?
I would say, so they have blue flamers. So the people that shoot straight to the top, they figure out how the management game gets played, and then they bounce around on different assignments so they can climb the ranks, and then they achieve power. Usually those people are not very good people for the most part, but they figured out how to play the game. And you have some agents who just kind of put their heads down and they just want to do their job, do their work. Those guys usually end up staying in the field office. So I think it's both ways. I think it's folks who, they just want to be left alone to a certain extent. So they'll comply with certain things to a certain amount because they just want to be left alone. So even if they got to comply with something that's maybe not the greatest, they're like, the thinking is, I just have to comply and do this once or twice, and I can be left alone to do whatever I want and have my career however I want to have it. So they never really take a stand on anything. So I think it's from both ends. I think it's an unwillingness to do the arduous good from the overwhelming majority of the workforce. And then you have unscrupulous people who are climbing the ranks and shucking and jiving and smiling and shaking hands and doing whatever temporary assignments they need to do to get into these positions of authority within the organization.
How political is the culture now in the FBI?
I don't know how about now, but
but
it was pretty. But it was.
Before.
I would say, I had a frank conversation with a supervisor in the building about it, and I just asked him straight up. I'm like, "Do you think they're going to pump the brakes or anything on this? Like, this is heavy-handed." Because there was kind of a sense, within the walls of the office of, okay, they're just kind of doing this initially, just a little bit of a shock and awe to get people to realize, hey, stay in control, you don't do this, and then we're going to dial it back and then just go after the most violent people. We're not really going to be chasing down grandma and grandpa.
You're talking about January 6th.
January 6th, right? We're not really going to be chasing down grandma and grandpa for months or years on end. Like, this is just kind of a quick little show of force to get people to say, hey, don't do this. And then we're going to dial it back to the most violent offenders. But it kept going on. So I had this frank conversation with a supervisor in the building who'd been around, a couple of different offices in the Bureau, some headquarters offices as well. So I judged this person has a good gauge on headquarters and how things run and that sort of thing. And just frankly told me, do you know how many lefties are up there? He's like, all these executives up there. He's like, they all donate to big Democrat causes. He's like, they're not going to pump the brakes at all on this. He's like, you know what this is going to turn into? He's like, these are going to be bullet points on people's resumes where they get their promotions and bonuses and whatnot. He's like, there's going to be resume bullet points where they're like, on January 6th, I did this. I conducted this many raids. I conducted this many arrests. I headed up this unit. I did that. He's like, this is their, golden opportunity for them to put bullet points on their resumes for advancement and bonuses, essentially. And I thought the individual was a good enough source of information based on his background to give that opinion.
One of the things that shows political leanings of it seems to me is the Hunter Biden laptop situation, where, if I understand it, 50 plus officials of the FBI signed an affidavit saying that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian misinformation, and that's been proven to be completely false. The question is, how in the hell did these 50 plus officials ever get off saying that. It's false.
Right.
Like, I understand one or two might have done that, and it seems like a real cultural problem. If you have 50 officials sign an affidavit, which is perjury,
Right.
saying that this was Russian misinformation, which was simply talking points from somebody, but it had no factual basis.
Right. Right.
How does that happen?
It's hubris and the thought that they'll never be caught and they'll never be held to account for what they did, even if it blows up. So I believe those 51 intelligence officials, I think all of their clearances have been stripped now.
Yeah,
but it's like,
did that, right?
But it's like, okay, it's one thing to strip your clearance, but like you did something that potentially affected the outcome of a national election. And
it's perjury. It's a crime.
That's crime. These are crimes. Like, you don't just get a little. Yeah. You know, if it was you or me, like, we'd get the book thrown at us and we'd be locked up for however, long. And so it's hubris.
And do you think what's the motive in doing it? Is the motive, hey, we're going to be part of the 51 that kind of do this, that are anti-Trump, and so the Democrats continue to stay in office and we'll get promotions? Is that the basic logic of their motive?
I mean, the basic logic is they viewed, Donald and his administration as a threat to them and their interests. And the intel community has been doing corrupt things for a long time, and people aren't held to account. And so you have the hubris factor, you have the money factor, the power, the pat on the back, we're going to give you this position, whatever the motivation is for these people. They know they can get away with it, and they know they don't want anything to do with the Trump administration, which they view as a threat to them and their interests, which they will then conflate to be American national security interests, but it's really their own personal interest or whoever is lobbying them, their interests.
And talking about this culture at the FBI and getting involved in political issues and elections, James Comey comes to mind. I mean, do you have any comments about him or his role or what he was like? And I don't follow this stuff real closely, but I'll never forget when he came out and I watched the press conference where, he read the standard of law for what was essentially gross negligence or recklessness or intent, whatever the exact legal terminology was, for Hillary Clinton's email server being wiped and destroyed or whatever. And he read the legal standard like a legal brief does. And then he says, and then here are the facts, but we don't find that the facts meet this. And every lawyer watching it saying, he just gave the exact black letter law. He gave facts that fit this perfectly, and yet he's deciding not to prosecute her. Right. It defied legal common sense, in my opinion. Right. The facts fit the law. She should have been indicted. Right. Now he did release that during a political campaign, which kind of tanked, probably people's opinion of her. Right. But still, the law is the law. It should be apolitical. Right. So anyway, I don't know what to think about that guy. I don't follow him. I didn't read his stupid book. All I know about him is he's really tall. Yeah. And much taller than people realize. I think he's like 6'9" or something. Right. But when I hear that name, I think corruption. I think big time. Like, he may have had a significant influence on the FBI in a short period of time. Do you have anything to say about that guy?
I can say when that happened, there are a good amount of agents, at least, locally, who were ticked off about it for the reasons that you explained. It's like, so we're not going to go after her at all? Like, what is this? Like, this is a complete clown show.
It was a clown. Legally, it was a clown show.
It was a total clown show. And so people were ticked off about it. And then, but again, there's kind of a split in the FBI because there were people locally in the office who were producing cups and stickers that said Comey's homies on them. Wow. And distributing them in the field office. Wow. Which should not have been occurring.
Comey's homies.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so he's a con man. And the few people I knew a couple of folks who were on his detail, and they said he was just a complete jerk. And they were like, because for a while he had like a honeymoon period there where people were like, man, we really like him. This guy's slick. And then, that waned. And some of those folks were saying, we knew that before everybody else knew it, just because of how he was behind closed doors. So yeah, your thoughts of him being a con man, I would concur with that. And then that led into Mr. Ray. So it's not been a good run for the FBI for quite a while. So,
where do you think where do you think the FBI stands today? Okay, Trump's in office. A lot of reforms are happening around the country. Is the FBI reformable, and in what ways? I mean, just kind of what's your opinion on all of that?
Yeah, my opinion on the FBI is I don't think it's actually salvageable. And I don't think it's the end of the world for the United States of America if there's a sunset date for the FBI within the next 6 months.
But doesn't there have to be some kind of federal investigative body of, because
right.
you got U.S. attorneys who are doing prosecution of federal crimes. Don't you have to have some kind of law enforcement muscle behind that?
Right. You just farm that out. If they salvage the place at all, which I wouldn't advise, but if they did, it just needs to be a straight criminal investigative agency. They need to get out of the predictive,
intelligence.
Right. They need to get out
it's
of the
like it seems to me like
completely.
when the FBI became more like the CIA, it got all screwed up.
Right.
I mean, is that like the simple second grade version of all this? Is like when the FBI started acting like the CIA, it got all messed up.
Right. And I think around 9/11, there was the debate, kind of like with the Brits, MI5, MI6. And I think the Bureau fought tooth and nail to not have a separate domestic, intel organization created. The argument was that they could do both, which I would say they can't. And I would just say, from what I've observed of the culture, I don't think it needs to exist. What capabilities they have need to be farmed out to another organization to get the job done. I've worked on task forces with local and state investigators who are fantastic, and I think that can get the job done. If we need to do something federally to support local and state agencies or another federal agency to absorb some of that criminal investigative mission, then I think that would be a good outcome for the people. But I think we need to move away from the FBI.
But how do you farm out to individual state authority? Because you have to cross state lines and have the license to do that.
Right. I mean, they have the DHS, HSI. I mean, they have to have some reforms there too. I just don't think they don't have as much of the credibility taint as the FBI does right now. Obviously, there's some taint on there because we don't know the exact federal footprint that was there that day, January 6, 2021. But obviously, the organization that was kind of used as the vanguard, in the quote unquote weaponization of the government against the American people, it was the FBI. So there's a serious credibility issue with the FBI that I don't think that they can recover from, even if they try to do a salvage job, which is what they're attempting right now.
Right.
I think it's a fool's errand, and I think it's fool's gold for the American people. I think for the American people, they need to demand those capabilities get farmed out somewhere else.
Well, it's one thing for Trump to discontinue the Department of Education. He ain't ever going to disband the FBI, man. You know that ain't going to happen.
I don't know. We'll see. If he did, we'll see.
I mean, I could see him making a case to the American public of saying the FBI's core purpose is to investigate federal crimes, and because it's gotten into the intelligence business, it's screwed that up.
Right.
So we need to get rid of that, let the CIA do that, which that CIA is a whole nother conversation. They've been corrupt since day one. But in my uneducated, ill-formed, silly opinion, but that's a whole nother thing.
Right.
But I could see him saying, get rid of that intelligence and let them work with U.S. attorneys on prosecuting cases, and catch the bad guys. They just investigate federal crimes, period.
Right.
Get out of everything else. And I could see him doing that. But disbanding the FBI, shoot, I wouldn't bet $1 on that.
Yeah.
But
we'll see.
I don't have any.
We'll see.
I have no reason to say that other than just like a normal guy.
I don't think it's salvageable, but I mean, the recommendations I've made, for people who have been willing to listen in DC has been, if anything is maintained of the place, it needs to just be straight criminal investigative.
Yeah.
The national security side needs to completely go away.
Right.
That needs to be done.
Right.
They don't do that well from my, former driver's seat position, especially coming from the Marine Corps and a couple of other different places I worked. I don't think they do that very well. A lot of the intel people there would probably say the same thing because they all thought the training at Quantico was a joke.
Yeah.
So I think they can sunset that.
It's like anything.
Very easily.
Once any entity goes beyond the scope of their original intent, they usually start to screw up.
Right.
That's just human nature, right?
Right.
So that brings us to your testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now we fast forward to 2023. 2024, you did 2 different testimonies. It's very few people on the planet can say I've testified before Congress twice, which is pretty cool. But you did that. So give us a little bit of backstory to how we get there, and then we're going to play a couple clips of your interesting fiasco there.
Yep. So how we get to the first testimony is, as I was mentioning before, my initial attorneys from Bigley Ranish were getting ghosted. And so they knew that the government's play was to try to bleed us out financially. And being good, ethical attorneys, they didn't want that to happen. So they started looking for a good advocacy group for me. And we eventually got on to Judicial Watch, which agreed to take on my case. And Judicial Watch sued the FBI on my behalf for viewpoint discrimination in December of 2022. And when they got on board, that's when things really started moving because they generated a lot of press because it's Judicial Watch and people were paying attention now. So now the Bureau was very engaged and very interested. And essentially we used the courts to advance essentially an administrative process, the courts holding the Bureau to account to like, you will respond within a reasonable time in this case. And we go from there, December of 2022, we get to the spring time frame. And at that point, we're pretty confident we have a whistleblower retaliation complaint, based on the September 29th email from 2021. And then we're also pretty confident that we have an abuse of the security clearance process. So an abuse of an administrative process being used as like a tool of persecution or punishment. And so those are the complaints that get lodged. We join up with an advocacy group called Empower Oversight, which is a whistleblower advocacy group. And they agree to take us on, and they file a complaint with the Office of the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, alleging retaliation for my protected whistleblower disclosure, and then also highlighting the abuse of the security clearance process as to be used as a weapon of retaliation against those who've fallen out of favor with the organization. And so those complaints happen. And then within 2 weeks of that, my clearance gets revoked. So within 2 weeks of filing the complaint, my security clearance is finally revoked. And it's revoked right before the hearing in May. I believe it was about 10 days before the actual hearing. And then there's a hit job that's done via the New York Times on both me and Steve Friend the night prior to the testimony in May.
Convenient timing.
Yeah, literally came out the afternoon, evening before our testimony.
Do you think that's something where the FBI feeds them information and says, hey, release this?
Right, likely. One of the jokes I've heard is if the agency wants to leak something to the press, they use the Washington Post, and if it's the Bureau, then they use the New York Times. Then that's how we get to the testimony. I believe it was May 18th, 2023. And then obviously in the testimony, I mentioned that the investigators from Security Division themselves, blurted out, don't sue us. Mentioned willful ignorance on the part of many coworkers and managers and executives along the way who had, concerns and issues, but just put their head down and just did what they were told. And then obviously brought up the point of the whistleblower retaliation for the protected disclosure and then the security clearance abuse. And that, obviously the hearing itself kind of turned into an internet carnival to a certain extent.
Now, what was the hearing? Like, what was, what? They didn't just call this just to talk to you, did they?
No, it was it was the weaponization of the government subcommittee from under the judiciary. And it's headed by Chairman Jordan.
Yes.
And then
he was worried about, like we were talking about, he was worried about these retaliations.
He was worried about the weaponization of these.
So he had a series of hearings.
Correct.
And you were one of them.
And in this hearing, along with Steve and Garrett, and then Tristan Levitt from Empower Oversight, we spoke about essentially the weaponization of government.
So that's the first one in 2023.
Correct.
Now you made your big statement about the Rosary and stuff in 24.
In September of 2024.
Okay, right.
Yep.
So the first one, did we have clips from that first one, Kevin, or just the second
I'm
one?
not sure which ones they're from. With the
Yeah.
opposing.
Yeah. So if
Congressman-
it's Congressman Sanchez, that's the May 2023
Yeah, we
hearing.
got that one.
Yeah. And then the Rosary is from the September 2024 hearing.
Right. So, all right. So 2023, take us there, right? So you're there. You got Republicans, Democrats. They get little time segments. They ask you questions.
Right.
The Democrats basically try to make you look like a traitor.
Right.
And the Republicans make you look like a hero.
Right.
Okay. So that's just a very partisan kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. For me, from my perspective, what I digested from it was you're sitting at the table and it's stepped up. So you're looking up towards these representatives. It gave me a very through the looking glass type, feel, or Alice in Wonderland, where
Yeah.
she's sitting there in front of the Queen of Hearts and she's like
Way
up
up
on
high, yeah.
and like looking down, like, berating you. And so you're watching all this unfold, and I could very much tell on the Dem side of the house, they have their staffers and whatnot running around like house mice, and it looks like they're bringing out literally scripts to read. And I could very much tell that they're literally just reading straight from these scripts. Now that morning, before I headed in, on the way in, my counsel had called frantically because they thought I had posted something inflammatory on Twitter, now called X, which I hadn't.
Right.
So they had created, some likely,
So you think, that wasn't a real Marcus Allen then? Okay,
No,
we're going to
so-
watch that clip. We're going to watch that clip.
Yep.
We got
Yeah.
two
This is
clips here.
crazy. This
Yeah.
is such a stupid story, but it's
Yeah.
it's crazy.
We
Yeah.
got two clips. We'll have a break for a second between the two of them.
All right, so just see what the first one is, and then we'll let him commentate. All
My
right, so
colleagues on the far right are on a mission to attack, discredit, and ultimately dismantle the FBI. This is defund the police on steroids. As part of their mission, my colleagues have brought in these former agents, men who lost their security clearances because they were a threat to our national security, who, out of malice or ignorance or both, have put partisan agenda above the oath they swore to serve this country and protect its national security.
So that was the kind of an example of an opening statement, right? Like they would just kind of read that.
Yeah.
What was it like sitting there having to listen to her?
I mean, I pretty much knew that they were going to be on the attack because the New York Times article had come out the night before, the way I'd been treated by the Bureau the entire time. So I knew pretty much this was just going to be, at least from the Dem side, an attempt to just straight out discredit me or tear down those of us who were there testifying that day. So I wasn't that startled or shocked or surprised by their tactics coming out straight away. I knew they were going to go on the attack, and I could see them essentially coming with their scripts. I very much got the impression that the reps themselves weren't that prepared. They were literally like just the front piece, the actors just reading off, the papers that were brought to them to read. And so in that regard, I didn't really take them seriously as people, which,
Who do you think would have prepared their remarks then?
probably staff. It could have been strategy groups. It could have been interest groups. It could have been, lobby groups that had stuff prepared, or their staffers themselves coordinating with those people to generate those remarks.
Now, when you hear what she just said, I mean, how do you want to respond to that? Because I mean, you're not a big fan of the FBI, at least at this point.
Right.
I mean, you've just said,
Right.
you kind of would like to dismantle some of it.
Right.
She said that. She said other things. So, I mean, how do you respond to something like that?
I mean, for me personally, like, I just take it as like these people, they have their line in the sand, and this is the side that they've chosen to fight for. They're not here to represent the American people. They have some kind of a partisan agenda that they're representing. For me personally, like, it's kind of like you're on a battlefield. I don't expect the enemy to say anything good about me. And I don't like to, I guess, look at supposedly representatives of the people as like the enemy. But I think these people have kind of they've kind of made that line in the sand.
Well, it's
so to me,
interesting.
it's like a war fighter who's on the other side taunting you and calling names at you. So for me, it doesn't really, it kind of bounces off. I mean, it sucks, but at the same time, it's like these people have declared themselves enemies of the country, enemies of truth. So why should I be shocked that they're up here lying through their teeth for money?
Right.
So that's my analysis of them, is they're paid prostitutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's pretty much the way they came off. So I'm just like, I expect a prostitute to speak like a prostitute.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The next one, Kev, you want to play this one? This one's kind of funny to me.
I mean, in retrospect, it's all funny. You feel like you're
No,
under
it's not.
attack.
I'm sure it wasn't funny.
You're
then,
under
man.
attack at the time.
I'm not
but
trying
yeah,
to make
right.
light of it, but
right.
it's so stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what you're saying here, just to give some context to it, it appears that somebody created a Twitter account as if it was you.
Correct.
As opposed to just some previous existing Marcus Allen that got pulled in here innocently.
No, yeah, I'm highly suspicious, and we believe like probably somebody affiliated with their side created it so that they could use that for the hearing. So these are the types of attacks we came under, you know, going up there to testify.
Let's watch this one.
Mr. Allen, have you ever used Twitter? Yes or no?
I have utilized Twitter, yes.
Okay, and is your account at Marcus A970500645?
What an awesome account.
Absolutely not my account.
Okay, that's not your account. Well, on December 5th, 2022, an account under the name Marcus Allen retweeted a tweet that said,
That
quote,
is not my account, ma'am.
you haven't let me finish the question,
Might have been
sir.
the football player.
You haven't let me finish the question. And the time is mine. On December 5th, 2022, an account under the name of Marcus Allen retweeted a tweet that said, quote, Nancy Pelosi staged January 6th, retweet if you agree, end quote. Do you agree with that statement? Yes or no?
That is, I don't, no ma'am, that's not my account at all.
I'm asking whether you agree with that statement, yes or no?
Can you please rephrase the
Yeah.
statement?
Do you think
Time the
that
gentle lady
Nancy
has
Pelosi
expired.
staged January 6th? I just want him to answer
He'll
the
answer.
last
He'll answer.
question.
Yeah, he'll answer. I'm just telling you your time's up.
Do you believe that Nancy Pelosi, do you agree with the statement that this person tweeted that Nancy Pelosi staged January 6th? Yes or no?
No.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's interesting. That's funny because, you know, counsel called me as I was literally driving through DC traffic, you know, on the way to the Hill to testify. And they were frantic, like, what did you post on Twitter? And I'm like, I don't even have a Twitter account. You know, I have one now, you know, post everything happening, you know. But at the time, I didn't have a Twitter account because, like, to me as Intel guys, I mean, you don't have, like, a personal Twitter account. Like, if you do, it's maybe a stubby that you have just so you can search what's out there on the internet. So it's like a research account, but you're not out there
It's not
posting
it's not
things.
personal. Yeah.
You're not doing that. And
Right.
so I was like, no. They're like, this isn't you? I'm like, no. I'm like, they're probably staging it so they have something to use for, you know, for the testimony today, which
Yeah.
is exactly what they did. Because they didn't have anything. So they
Right.
had to generate things. So to me, it was just a total clown show. I mean, I'm sitting there, I've already conveyed, you know, it looks like this Alice in Wonderland type event where the house mice are scurrying back from the back of the house, you know, to bring out the scripts for, you know, their actors
Yeah.
to read off, you know, the statements that they're not even fully aware of themselves. I would never do that. I'd
Yeah.
never read off something that I didn't 100%,
Yeah.
you know, have confidence on, that I'd verified or at
Right.
least, you know, gave you my weighted opinion on. But these people apparently have no problem with that.
Kevin, you want to play the famous one now? Yep. This is the one that set your life in another trajectory you probably could have never imagined.
Yeah.
You want to hang on, before you hit play, you want to give context?
Yeah, so this statement that I'm getting ready to read here, I can tell you was pretty much prompted by the Holy Spirit. I could see what was going on, the Holy Spirit, but then also natural abilities and experience. But I crafted this statement and I didn't have any idea that I would even be able to read this statement off at the hearing. So I don't think people know that. This wasn't like a set thing where, hey, Mr. Allen, you know, we're going to give you this time in the middle to read off this statement. This is something that I just crafted probably a couple of weeks ahead based on a prompting from the Holy Spirit of, hey, be prepared to give a message if you're on the Hill again. So I was like, okay, I'll have it at the ready. I'll know when the moment arises. And this is when the moment arises. And Congressman Dan Bishop, former Congressman Dan Bishop,
who's a friend of the family.
Yeah.
And at my parents' house, we know him. Shout out to Dan Bishop. Fine man.
Yeah, he's awesome. I got to speak to Congressman Bishop after the first testimony, not this one. So he came out on his own accord and he offered his time for me to be able to give this statement. So that was completely uncoordinated.
Wow.
That just happened on its own. And so when the moment developed, I knew, from the spiritual prompting, okay, this is the moment for this statement.
And I have to point out, you got the tan Dewey Reams Bible sitting right there next to your microphone.
Yep. That's the one. That's the one you want.
Yeah.
There's a story behind that one too.
How much did we pay you for that? Zero, I promise.
This is Providence. This
Right,
is Providence. So, in that specific Bible, the Challoner Bible, when I was, increasing in fervor for the faith, I'm essentially a revert. I had a dreams and visions, because I had been using this, the basic Bible that you get when you're a kid. So like the kiddie version of the Bible. And I just had a dream, and in the dream, it simply said, get the Challoner Bible. This was years ago, completely ignorant. I woke up, what is the Challoner Bible? So, go do research on the internet, Bishop Richard Challoner, English translation of the Latin Vulgate, the Dewey Reams Bible. And so I'm like, okay, I get it. This is a kiddie Bible, and you want me to have this Dewey Reams Challoner Bible.
Yeah.
And so that's the Bible I got after that.
It's a heavy duty Bible.
Yep.
It's
I love
beautiful.
it. It's great. It hits different.
Yeah. Actually, that big Bible right there, that's Challoner. That's just a.
It hits a lot different. Yeah. Everyone get one.
Yeah, there you
Not
go.
paid.
Yeah. All right. So Congressman Dan Bishop gives you time here.
Yep.
And you read this statement, and this is what really hit the internet. Go ahead, Kevin.
This is a warning to the American people. I say, I personally have no confidence that the FBI will rein in its own conduct. I have been persecuted along with Garrett, Steve and Kyle, and countless other whistleblowers. It is my opinion that the Bureau used reprisal and fear to control the workforce. It has been a seemingly effective tactic. I personally believe that there are no current effective checks and balances against them conducting lawless action with any type of correction in a legitimate time frame. I welcome the work of the IG, but I think any type of lawless action, there's no legitimate time frame to rein them back in. Their ability to overclassify information can allow them to stonewall forever. To the American people, you have a duty as a citizen to vote, and I strongly urge you to do so. It's how you participate in the American experience. I know people have doubts about election integrity, but you must vote. It is your claim. Stake your claim and don't forfeit it willingly. Have your voice heard. My other recommendations are in the natural order. First, vote. The second is the Second Amendment. Arm yourself and know how to defend yourself. Make 3 to 4 friends in your neighborhood and promise to come to each other's mutual aid in times of hardship. And during the Great Depression, people stocked up a pantry. So I think that's a good practice, especially in our economic times, and make sure you have 3 to 4 months of food. As a person of faith, I'd say pray the Rosary, go to the First Friday devotions. That's for everybody, all my brothers and sisters of all faiths, and I know I'm Catholic, and read the gospel of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and live it every day. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for the time.
Good to go.
Powerful stuff.
Good to go. Yeah.
Kevin, you got any questions about that? Because, I know I do, but you thought a lot about that too.
My main question is, it's a little apocalyptic, right? You have
Yeah.
a very perhaps pessimistic view of the direction of the culture in our country to warn people to prepare for that. If you'd like to comment on that a bit, but I also know from speaking with you personally that you also have optimistic views about,
Do you have a microphone back there? Do they hear that, or I need to say it again?
You can say it again.
I don't know if you have a microphone there, but yeah, he was asking if it's a little bit of an apocalyptic view, and you have any comments on that, and then you also have a very optimistic views. So
Right. Yeah.
Just to make sure people heard what Kevin said. Kevin's way smarter than me, And I thought he should just be the one who does this whole interview. But the brain just sitting behind the camera.
All good. No, I guess you could say, to a certain extent, perhaps we are in the end times. We don't know when it's going to, truthfully end. But, Jesus came back. It's been 2,000 years since the resurrection, 2,000 years for his message to go out around the planet in all languages, to be, witness to all peoples. And we really aren't heading in the greatest of directions as a people in the United States or in the West. The best advice I can still give people is to get right with God, love God, love neighbor, and do that to the best of your ability. Don't get too hung up on if things break apart. You don't want your peace to be disturbed. You need to be able to, as they say, fight in the shade, or stand through the fire, like the martyrs in the early church, who went to their deaths singing joyfully, moms with babies in their hands, singing joyfully because they knew as soon as they were going to be martyred that they were going to be with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the entire angelic court, and all the saints, and God the Father in heaven at the end of it. We're eternal beings. Our time here is short. Don't be too attached to your time here. Do the best you can while you're here. Don't take certain, we were joking earlier, don't take the approach of God will take care of everything. It's like, yeah, God will take care of everything, but he needs your hands and eyes and ears and feet as well to witness to him and to do things in the world. So there are practical things that you can do to prepare. So that's where, the recommendation for a pantry came from. A lot of folks have been struggling economically for a long time. There's a lot of division in the country, wars, rumors of wars. So it's just prudent to have some kind of a pantry store and to get right with God. So I guess I'm optimistic in the sense in that we don't live for this world. We live for the kingdom of heaven. As soon as you put on that lens, then everything else makes sense. You could live through our times. You could have lived through France in the late 1700s when they were killing priests and nuns and other people of faith and stood firm. You could have lived in the Roman times when they were killing Christians in the Colosseums. You could have lived in Europe during World War II when they were rounding up, our Jewish brothers and sisters and Catholic priests and anybody else that stood up against the Nazis but that were getting killed. You can have joy in the middle of combat. Don't let anyone steal your joy, no matter how black things get. I think that's the best message I can give to people. Don't be shaken. Don't be discouraged. Even if everything's falling apart, your hope is in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. We just had Easter yesterday. He conquered sin and death. Cling to him. The harrowing of hell, he's conquered everything. You just put your faith and hope in him and do the best you can while you're a human being here on earth. Drag yourself to heaven and drag as many of your friends and neighbors and strangers to heaven as you possibly can. That's the best message I can absolutely give to people. As far as the Bureau, I don't know if they're going to be salvaged. They're obviously trying to do a salvage job. My worry with them is we have the current administration in. Okay, everything's, well, not really. They're trying to portray it like it's kittens and roses, but it's not really. But maybe you have the sense like it's going to be okay. All it's going to take is for another tyrannical administration to come in. And my stance is the personnel at the Bureau will just follow orders and do what they're told. To me, that's a threat. But I guess I can't just lay that on them solely. That's a culture problem as well. You're only going to have so many good people getting pulled into these organizations of this type as the culture is good. And right now the culture is pretty rotten. So you're only going to have as good as organizations, you're going to get the leaders you deserve. So if you have a rotten culture, you're going to get rotten leaders. You're going to get rotten security officials. How do you fix that? God, take care of your family. There's a bunch of ills, all the out of wedlock births, the broken families. I can tell you, honestly, working with the Charlotte JTTF, one of the things we talked about was just most of the cases we had that were significant, there was some brokenness in the family. A lot of times it had to do with fatherlessness. We joked around sometimes that you could really just call us either crazy squad because the people were on some kind of SSRIs or something of that nature, or it was like a fatherlessness issue or a deadbeat dad issue. So there's something important to having intact families and success. I know from a faith perspective, I had seen some stats years past where it said if mom was the only one practicing the faith, then there was about an 18% chance that the kids would hold on to the faith into adulthood. If it was just the dad, it was 78% chance that the kids would hold on to the faith. And if it was mom and dad together, then it was an 80% chance. So only a 2 percentage point uptick if it was both mom and dad together witnessing to the faith versus just dad. So it's very important for men, especially, to have faith in God and to be good and faithful witnesses, even if you don't have a family of your own, just to be good, solid men in society and be good leaders and to have a strong faith in God. And just, once again, read the gospel of Jesus Christ and live it every single day. I don't know, I could keep going on forever and ever here, but I mean, God's at the center of this thing. I mean, you got the founding fathers, I believe it was Adams. Our society is only built for moral and religious people. It talks about the virtue of education. This country is built for an educated citizenry. So there's something to a belief in God, faith in God, living that every day, and then civic virtue, participating in the society. I've had a chance to talk to, civic advocacy groups, some of them Christian, and, these ladies are pulling their hair out their heads because we're going and we're talking to, they're saying they're going and they're talking to these Christians in the countryside, and they're like, I don't need to vote. I don't need to participate. And it's like, all I have to do is pray. And it's like, yes, pray, but you also do have a responsibility, civic virtue, to participate. I think it's pretty embarrassing. There were stories coming out from outlets prior to the election last year that roughly only about 50% of Christians even vote. That's an abdication of duty. Like, you have a duty to participate in your civic process. And if things fall apart in your society and you haven't even done the bare minimum, then you are complicit. It's your fault. You have a duty.
I can't follow that. It's a beautiful message. Marcus Allen, thank you for your service to our country and to Holy Mother Church.
Amen.
Thanks for being here, brother.
Good deal. You want to say a glory be?
Glory be.
Let's do it.
Father,
Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right. Let's do it again.
Rock and roll, man.
All right. Thanks.
God bless you.
You too.
Thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.